Everybody ready? Let's get this started. Would everybody please stand? Welcome to the Town of Fairfield Board of Finance Quarterly Budget Review. We're going to ask Mr. DeWitt to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. First of all, I'd like to congratulate everyone on the results of the last election. This is not the first meeting of the new term. This is the last meeting of the old term. But we'll have all the familiar faces back, and congratulations to everybody on that. And we look forward to working with everyone in the next couple of years. So the agenda for tonight's quarterly meeting, we have the first item, which was to hear a presentation on the clubhouse project. We're going to postpone that to the next meeting. That had to be, this is procedural. We postponed it to a date certain, so we need to move that to December to hear from the Parks and Rec area and the commission regarding that all-important project. Then we're going to take a look at the Board of Ed first quarter financial position, the town's first quarter financial position. We're going to hear, as we usually do, about pension and OPEB. We have some transfers to do from the chief fiscal officer relative to, these are contract related, are they not? So we need to do that, and that would have been the only thing on our agenda if we had met a couple weeks back. So glad we postponed it to tonight. And then we have updates on 3 different items. First of all, we're going to hear from the Strategic Planning Committee. Mr. Wynn's going to join us this evening to give us an update on where that is. Then we're going to hear an update on the pile cleanup. There's been some press about this, about where that stands, and we're going to hear where that is and go forward plans. And then a carryover item, a follow-up item from a last quarterly review meeting on the special election and costs related to that. Before I go any further, are there any questions, comments, or concerns from board members? Seeing none, I'm going to take item number 1, to hear a presentation on H. Smith Richardson Clubhouse Project. The intent of me bringing this up is, as I said, we delayed it to a date certain, which was tonight, and now we need to postpone it to our December 5th Board of Finance meeting. If you recall, we heard about this and we kind of had some questions related to the proof of concept, where the committee was going. It went to the RTM. I'm told they took no action on the item, and it's gone back to the Board of Selectmen, and they've heard or are about to hear a presentation. Did they hear it already on kind of what's going on with that committee, what's going on with that project? You'll recall they had come forward, formed the committee, which needed approval by the RTM, and requested $250,000 in seed money. And this board had some question relative to how is that seed money going to be spent, what's the proof of concept, what's been done to prove what we want up at the clubhouse. Mr. Tetra, I see you're here. Thank you. Did you guys hear the presentation yet? Okay, so we're going to hear that at our December 5th meeting. Any questions, comments, or concerns on this item? Seeing none, can I have a motion to... Oh, go ahead, Mrs. Marmon.
I just have a question. We don't have minutes from the last meeting. Is that because it's a quarterly?
Yes,
review?
they'll be
Okay.
in the next meeting. Thank
Okay,
you very
just-
much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, I'm going to make a motion that we postpone this item to be a date certain, our December 5th, 2017 Board of Finance meeting. Do I have a second to my motion? We'll take Mr. Mottola. All in favor of postponing this to December 5th? Those opposed? Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, can you make sure that proper notifications are made? Thank you. All right, the next item is to review the Board of Education's financial position as of the end of Q1 of this fiscal year. The superintendent is here and Mrs. Manzel is here. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for being here. Mr. Dwyer, the chairman of the board, is here as well. And thank you, Mrs. Manzel, for the written document. That's always very helpful to go through what's going on with the Board of Education at the end of a quarter. So I'll turn it over to you if you have any comments to make before we go any further.
Okay, well, I'm going to take notice of the agenda item that says abbreviated.
Okay.
The headline on this year's report is obviously the reserves. With the, given the state budget situation, we identified $2.3 million in our budget to hold on reserve. That number came from, at the time, there was a $1.2 million difference in the special ed grant that was proposed between the governor and excess cost. Also, $1 million in DDS residential costs that we were notified of that were potential, and then about $100,000 on pension that we were alerted of. So that's where the $2.3 million came from. We actually took it out of each line item where we held it and put it into the section called support expenses, so that it's completely out of the line item and not.
Did that take a vote of the Board of Education to actually do that and move that?
No, I did notify them because, I made note that Board of Ed policy is that, transfers over $10,000 need board approval, but they did approve, well, they did.
I know, it's loud tonight, yeah.
We had a full discussion of the 2.3 million, and the board was aware that it was going to be held, but we don't take formal motions on stuff like that. We kind of do it at the year end when we approve all transfers.
Got it. Do we have questions from board members? I have one that I was trying to figure out, and it might just be the way I read the write-up, right? So you have the 2.3 million that's set aside due to, we didn't know what was going on with the state, right? You also had $1 million, rough number, that the state might charge us, right, for what was that, housing costs? I don't remember. Isn't that the case, that it was part of the housing costs for special education needs, where the needs are so great they need to go live at the facility? Is that correct?
I'm always reminding people, please say yes or no and not nod, but, so I've been nodding and saying,
Yeah.
yes. Of the 2.3 million, 1 million was to account for the residential costs. It wasn't 2.3 plus $1 million.
That's what I was trying to get to. So really, the cut that can be quote-unquote absorbed is 1.3 million, because we believe that other million is going to be owed to the state. Is that correct?
We are really waiting right now still to find out. We received a letter, was it last week, I believe, Ms. Munsell? And to be honest with you, just the way the letter was written from the state was difficult to decipher. But to the best of our understanding right now is they're supposed to notify us by December the 1st if we are going to be billed for those residential students, so that we can then have meetings with the parents and the families of those students. But at this point, we're still waiting to see exactly who those students would be, and if they are going to notify us of those expenses.
Thank you for
One other
clearing
point
that up.
is, you may remember that we said that the 1 million was a best estimate based on the special ed students in outplacement last spring. Outplacement gets changed because of the needs of students, and so we still are using the 1 million figure, but that's not a known guaranteed number.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Mottola?
So you're waiting until December 1st to hear from the state with respect to whether you're going to have to pay that, or what amount you're going to have to pay?
Well, in the past, the way that it worked is we always paid for their educational cost. We did not pay for the residential cost if they were placed by DDS, Department of Developmental Services. Now, in the letter, it was a little alarming to me in that it actually expanded it, and they did include the Attorney General's opinion to say that, in fact, we are obligated, if they should choose, to pay the residential for students that are not only placed by DDS, but also Department of Child and Family, for any other department that has placed students. So we're going with the best knowledge that we have, because we don't always know who they've placed. That actually could be one of our students for a variety of reasons. But to the best of our knowledge, it could be around $1 million, but again, until they notify us. And what the state did is they said, you need to let school districts know by December the 1st. We would be shocked if they didn't pass any of that off, simply because the Attorney General has said that legally they can, and they're in the same budget situations that all the rest of us are.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else?
We talking about the entire document?
We can talk about the entire document. Is there anything specific to this item before we move forward? Seeing none, Mr. DeWitt, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under Personnel Services, by the way, this is a nice overview, thank you. If I understood it, then I guess everyone could have. So we've changed, our FTEs have gone up approximately 13, which I really don't want to question your changing full-time equivalents, to be perfectly honest with you. But I'm curious about your last sentence. You said, however, costs are offset by a reduction in contracted services. So you paid for 13 teachers, paras, assistants, and support staff by reduction in contracted services. What are those services?
That refers to just that last item, the .9.
So only the .9 FTE was paid for by contracted services?
By an offset.
Okay. Is that the way, did I just read it wrong? Efficiencies were achieved with a consolidation of duties through attrition, resulting in a slight increase of non-certified staff. However, costs are offset. To me, it kind of reads like you paid for 13 teachers in contracted services, which would be,
No, the .9
Awesome.
net increase in non-certified support staff is what that refers to.
okay,
It's just non-certified.
got it. So your budget took a hit for approximately 12 FTEs, if that total number's 13, based on the fact that .9 of that 13 was offset.
Correct.
I would say in simple math, yes, but because we're dealing with special education, it is highly likely you have to actually drill down into the programs to see the students who are able to stay with us, because remember, an outplay student averages $112,000 for a student. So we also, in these specialized programs, are able to meet the needs of more children.
Got
That are
it.
able
And
to
again,
stay
I don't
with
want
us.
to drive, I
Right.
don't want to question your totals, just that. And then I was.
Mr. DeWitt, can we stay on that?
Yeah,
for a
I'm
minute?
sorry, sure, yeah.
No, does anybody else have any questions on the FTEs? I actually did, and I
Oh,
wanted to
okay,
make sure
sorry,
we...
sure.
Is that, so if we were to go back to look at the budget book versus what we have now, we have a total of 12 or 13 additional bodies in the education staff at this point in time.
The bulk of those bodies are in 2 classrooms, 2. It's one, actually 3. We added 2 complex learner cohorts for special needs children, and we also had a special needs pre-K. And so those classrooms have a very high para support ratio, and you'll see that in that 7.9. And a matter of fact, that was one of the things when I first saw the number, I was like, why is that so high? And then I remembered which programs they were. So you only see 3.85 in teachers.
So what happened? And is this an anomaly this year? In other words, when that struck me when I saw, wow, we have 12 or 13. And again, like Mr. DeWitt, I'm not questioning the intent. I'm just trying to figure out what happened, because when I saw that, it just blew me away.
It's all driven by student need. And last year, we had some programs, our ECC program was bursting at the seams. So this year, we added that pre-K is now out at Stratfield. We don't even have a classroom for this class at ECC. And it's just driven again by student needs. The complex learner cohort, when your numbers start getting up around 8 and 9, it's too many students in one environment, so you have to create another program. We went last year being extremely at capacity in those programs, and this year, we had to add the additional services to get the numbers back down where they should be. And that's generally what happens. It starts smaller where you'd really like it to be, and then you grow a little bit, and then you add another class.
How do people get into these classes? I guess what I'm trying to get to is, there's a budget put together with certain assumptions. Those assumptions, as it relates to this, either turned out to be wrong, either more children showed up than we expected, more children, I don't know what the terminology is, classified or assigned, or more people applied? What happened here?
Yeah, every year is different, and sometimes we will have one student who is new to the school district that has complex learning needs, and they need to be in that program. We also have, and these are elementary programs, so a lot of these children are going through qualification, when they're little, and so we don't know what their needs are until they are hit 5 or 6 years old. Some of those children then go into these programs, but it is unique, and we have an awesome school system, so we're known to have a great special education program, and people will move here, not only for special education, music, and everything else. So you don't know from one year to the next who's going to actually be enrolled.
So these are either children that moved into the system or
They may have
They
just
got
qualified for
reclassi-
special education services. They could be new students to us. They may be students that perhaps their parents didn't want them in a CLC in kindergarten and first grade, and by second grade, they're realizing that they need a more significant service delivery, and so the team is deciding to put them in a CLC. So there's a vast array of reasons why your numbers would go up or down on any given year.
what's the general, do they typically, what have we been doing? Mrs. Mansell, maybe that's more for you. Have we been going like this, or is this year an anomaly, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I never remember seeing, by the way, we had to hire 12 to 13 more bodies in any given year off of budget.
Oh, the one thing I always say when I'm writing up special ed, it's unpredictable. You can't say from one year to the next that you can, there's a trend or, you can see what's coming. It's unpredictable.
Okay, but we haven't changed policies or anything? Okay.
It's driven by federal law.
There's a third possibility also, and that is the staff recognize the needs of a child in the spring, May and June, but over the summer, children change, and so therefore, when they come to the school in the fall, they may require more support than they did in the springtime. So there's a variety of factors. That's another one of them.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this specific item? All right, Mr. DeWitt, go right ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Under Maintenance, Operation, Transportation, I was really nice to see that an efficiency study by First to reduce 2 bus routes. That's really fantastic. That's a great savings. On your third paragraph, the budget of $3.2 million for maintenance services is for preventative maintenance, repairs, and major maintenance. But 900,000 of that is frozen, so I get it. So how much of that 900 is preventative maintenance, or is that just for the projects?
It's about 50/50 between projects and, I don't know that, it's not necessarily preventative maintenance that we're maintaining. It's
Repairs.
other things like, paving. We shave that off a little bit, painting, that kind of thing.
Okay. Because my concern is always, when we don't, preventative maintenance is one of those things that if you don't keep up, you can 2-3x the cost later on. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Any other questions for the Board of Education right now? Mr. Backer?
Just to jump on that about sort of the issue if you're not doing the right things now and the costs that can occur later on the maintenance side. It seems though that you guys are trying not to take too much away, but over time it's clearly come out of the maintenance side. What are you doing to ensure that those even minor reductions in those areas don't ultimately cost us more? I mean, anything that you let lapse even a year or two and even minor can just, escalate it out over all the buildings and whatnot can actually add up very quickly, so.
What I can say is that, just keep in mind, first of all, this is in reserve right now. We hope that some of this will be unfrozen by the end of the year so that we can move forward. Some of these projects are projects that need to be done when it's hot. So we're able to sit and watch without too much stress. And then there are things like painting. Painting just it makes the climate of the building not feel as nice when the walls look kind of dirty. And when you talk about 17 different facilities, it still has a cost to it. So those are the sorts of decisions we're making that don't impact safety. They're not a tripping hazard for somebody, but they are things that we need to be sure we keep up with so that our facilities are well maintained. But if we need to spread that out and not do 4 buildings this year, we're going to do 2, then that's what we'll do. But Cullen is very thoughtful about what needs to be done today, what we could, reserve until the spring, and if we absolutely have to, move it to next year and it will bump something else.
Well, I think that's more where I'm going, is eventually it catches up and then something else gets bumped. So it may not
Right.
be a painting thing that gets bumped later, but you've got to catch up. You know what I mean? It's got this sort of prolonged effect. And I think we're not necessarily just doing this now. This has been going on for years, right?
Right.
So it's sort of, we're already into that effect and it's only going to get worse. So and I get the answer. The simple answer is that he's doing a good job and going through. It over a period of time, it's starting to accumulate where it gets a little bit concerning. It's kind of an area that just can multiply very quickly if we're not careful.
Right. And I would agree with that. And I think we're trying to be very thoughtful about every aspect of the budget, because you could say that for technology, if you put it off, it becomes that much more expensive and more difficult to keep up with. Our textbooks, if you allow textbooks to get 7 or 8 years old, you're actually giving and providing information that's not even up to date for children. So we're trying to balance all of that right now and be really thoughtful in every category.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the education budget or the education first quarter? I have one. So we talked about the staffing and the increases there. As you're looking at your budget, which areas, what has you concerned right now? Don't say the whole thing, I get it. But really, in specific, what line items are you guys watching saying, we're this is going to be an issue?
This year? Special ed?
Yeah.
Still. Because, and why do you say that? I understand we just talked about it, but is there something you're seeing that you're like, oh boy, this is going to nail us here?
No. It's just that it is really volatile. We've been in situations where we've had to freeze at halfway point, because things change between now and then, and it's always a factor that we have to deal with.
What else?
Not on the expense side, but on the revenue side. Although we've heard from the state, we are still planning on holding the full 2.3 million
Right.
because of potential losses of revenue down the pike. So that, for me, is a concern.
Anybody else, any other board members have any other questions? Mr. Becker?
Just on the special ed one, the budgeted versus where you think the reimbursement rate is? at
On the
this
excess
point?
cost,
Yeah. Percentage-wise?
they did fund it to
So
what we expected.
You,
initial-
okay.
What's that?
So what you estimated and what, percentage-wise, what you estimated and what they're currently projecting for the funding are the same right now?
Yes.
But
But some's at risk potentially if
Yeah.
they wanted to, right?
And something
To
like
get that last
DDS,
payment.
something like the DDS
yeah,
residential
that's-
could have an impact statewide, because there is one pot of money, and if a couple of school districts are submitting reimbursement for additional $1 million, that will come out of that same pot of money.
So some may, under the DDS, some may be able to go and ask for that money still, and it'll come out of that pot of money, even though maybe we're not able to ask for that?
No, if it meets the excess cost requirements, the threshold for a state agency placement is it's over one time our per pupil cost. As long as we pay the expenses, anything that's over that, we can get reimbursed.
Okay.
that being said, like, I think what Tony was saying is the other districts in the state that are in that same situation will be paying that also. So the state did fund excess cost in total, as they have in the past, but that one that one pie has to be split up between all the special ed expenses, including whatever we have to pay for DDS.
So the problem with flat funding from a dollar perspective, and now potentially backing DDS into that in some form across the state, is that on a percentage basis for Fairfield, our percentage, it may actually go down ultimately. Like dollar for dollar, it would actually, wouldn't it go down some?
Can I take a shot at this?
Go down or up, but it would seem that if more, yes, but it would seem that if more are going into that pot, and with simply inflation, it's going to be more districts hitting that pot with higher dollar figures, including our own,
Right.
driving our own percentage down.
Correct.
I mean, that's that's been the trend over time, right? So,
Correct. I would only mention this, that it's not our percentage. It is prorated for all towns, and so if everybody gets 77% of what you asked for, because that's the total that's been allocated, and too many people ask for much more, and we all go down to 72%. You know,
yeah, but when you keep the pot the same and everyone's expenses are going up,
Yep.
that number is always going down.
Percent goes
And
down.
that's my point, is that's, however you want to back into it, that percentage, the answer is that it's been funded, flat funded at the state, but realistically, if people are piling in with even more, including the DDS, that percentage may go down, and you may find yourself, even if everything stays exactly as you budgeted, to actually be a little bit less this year,
Correct.
right? Okay, that's what I'm concerned, okay, which is a concern, that's my point, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to turn our attention before you guys, first of all, I'd ask you to stay while we go through the town side very quickly, just because sometimes questions come up when we're discussing the town side that are relevant to the Board of Education. So if I can impose upon you to stick around just for that piece of the presentation. But before you walk away, can you give us an update? Looking further down the road, I don't think any of us believe that we're going to get more money from the state, unfortunately. And it quite possibly could be less. With that in mind, I know you guys have put together or are working on a committee to look at what's going on with potential cost savings and structural change within the education administration. I'd like to hear a little bit, I think we would like to hear a little bit about where that stands presently and what next steps are relative to that initiative, particularly as it relates to the upcoming budget as well.
You know, we held 2 meetings. We were not able to hold the third meeting. We had to wait for the election to kind of fill out the rest of the committee. At the first 2 meetings, a variety of ideas were put out, and where that stands at the moment is that the staff are reviewing the ideas, some of which were like immediate next year budget ideas, and others to implement, it would take more than 1 or 2 years to implement and start seeing the savings. So those ideas are being reviewed by staff and will be presented back to the committee and the Board of Ed probably sometime in December. The
So-
original committee contemplated a mid-January initial report.
So is it December or mid-January, and how does it relate to this year's budget? I know, Dr. Jones and Ms. Manzel, you're working on the budget right now for presentation to the Board of Education. How is this initiative playing with that? And, you know, that's our biggest concern at the present point, or my biggest concern, let me
Yeah,
talk.
there were
for me.
probably 15 plus or minus ideas that fall into for consideration by management in balancing next year's budget. It would not fall into, at least in my estimation, would not fall into the category of structural change, which in my mind is a bigger ticket item than the ideas that were put forth that fell into the bucket of ideas that the staff can look at and the Board of Ed can look at to balance next year's budget.
Okay, do we have any numbers associated with what we have for next year's budget that you guys are looking at, ballpark? As
Not
to
I think the staff are still in the midst of constructing next year's budget,
Right.
working on it.
Yeah, no, I'm just talking about if you have 15 initiatives or so that you're looking at, what's the magnitude of those initiatives?
Some of those initiatives had costs assigned to them from the prior year budget session, and others were new ideas, and work has not been done to say, what would this be worth yet?
But I guess, let me say it a different way. I'm not trying to pin you down to a specific number, right? But when you look at those 15 items, those 15 items, is it $100,000, or is it $1 million, or is it?
There are items that, some of the items don't, although it was a suggestion by a committee member, they don't save anything. But they're on the list because a committee member suggested it.
I wouldn't
Others-
prioritize those items, but that's
Others,
just me.
others save maybe 200,000, 2.25. Most of them are, that were costed out last spring, I'd say in the 50 to 75,000 range of potential savings for each idea, but I would not want to have you pin me down for a total amount of what that might be.
Okay. Do we have questions, Ms. Marmion, and then I'll go to Ms. Esma?
So thanks for that. So the central office staff is looking at those 15 or so items and kind of costing out potential savings, and then they might or might not propose that those be put into the budget. For the larger structural ideas that have come out, is the committee looking at more in depth, those ideas, costing them out, looking at timing, et cetera? Who's charged with kind of taking those ideas forward and fleshing them out?
What the commission statement contemplated is that, and the way the first two meetings were held, was brainstorm a variety of ideas, whether they were popular or not, whether they were supported by Board of Ed members or other people in the community, and then have the staff look at it and say, what really are structural changes that deserve further consideration, and then what are ones that really are ones to be used to look at balancing next year's budget if it was needed. And a third group that I'd say is not practical to consider. Somebody might say, we think this idea might be worth exploring, but we've explored it in the past and found that it really did not save us any money to any extent. So if you kind of look at those three buckets, the staff are not costing out the ideas at the moment, because what they're trying to do is narrow down the field of study, and everybody's favorite topic, one high school. It does not make sense, in my mind, for the Board of Ed to do for the staff to spend a lot of time on financial costing out one high school if indeed the Board of Ed or the committee or the town says it's not an idea worth exploring. Let's just say that's off the table and move on. So we don't want to task the staff with doing detailed financial analysis until we decide that that's an area we want to continue to explore. So you said the staff are costing it out. No, the staff are not costing it out. They're dividing the different ideas into buckets, and then we'll allow the committee and/or the Board of Ed to give direction as to what should be pursued in more detail.
Okay, so you're holding another meeting coming up soon, or what's kind of the next step for the committee itself?
The next step for the Board of Ed is on the 28th, when we hold our first meeting after the new election, and we have, for all intents and purposes, 5 new board members. If you count Mr. Acer as only being on board since April, and so it still is relatively new. And so the ad hoc committee, some members of the ad hoc committee were hoping that the Board of Ed might give them some direction as to what are the bounds of their study area. So I'm assuming that we'll have some discussion on the 28th. I'm not being evasive, just that I've got a brand-new board, and I need to see where they are before I say where they are.
And am I correct? And did you say that in January we're going to be getting
The
enrollment numbers?
The original commission statement contemplated that in mid-January, some initial ideas would be brought forward that the Board of Ed could use and the staff could use prior to adopting the January 30th deadline for our 18-19 budget. And then the next report was contemplated to be about mid-March, so that the Board of Finance and the RTM might be able to be informed by that information prior to their votes. And then the final report was expected to be in June, and those would deal with the, I'll say, the longer term. It takes longer to implement an idea and actually achieve savings from it. So the reports were contemplated in the commission statement on that kind of three-step process.
But some of the longer-term ideas, the structural changes, et cetera, are somewhat, I'm assuming, you're going to be looking at the enrollment numbers for the kids who, and that's not coming out until approximately January? Is that correct?
No, the enrollment numbers report that we got from Malone and McBroom was reviewed by the ad hoc committee at their October, I forget the date, but at their October meeting. So those numbers are known.
Any other question? Mrs. Marmion, I'm sorry, you're done, and then we go to Mrs. Esmond, and then I'll come over to Mr.
Thank you
DeWitt.
for this. Just to clarify something you said, Phil, what you've looked at so far, I know you can't speak with great specificity about this, but you're looking at a 1 to 2 year payback, if you will, this to see savings from some of these initiatives, or was that not the result of any great detailed study?
Well, 1 to 2 year payback assumes that here's the cost to implement, and we're going to get it back in 2 years and start savings. I don't think the committee and or the Board of Ed contemplated that there's a payback calculation just yet.
Okay. And on the structural changes, I mean, all the underlying studies you may need to rely on have already been done, correct? You wouldn't need to commission any other studies, do you think, at this point?
No, when you get into a more detailed study of a particular idea, I have no doubt that we might have to ask the people who did the enrollment study to do some more detailed study on this specific thought. So I wouldn't want to say that, no, everything that we need to know, we already know, and that we don't need any further consulting services, because we might.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. DeWitt?
Just as a point of reference for this board, being a Board of Finance, the process that Mr. Dwyer laid out, on how the options are coming forth and being down-selected without cost, was brought up as an issue by myself and Selectman Kiley at the last meeting. Because the company who came in, Briley, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Broom and Malone.
Bloom and Malone, gave very detailed studies about redoing districts and busing, and none of them had dollars associated with it. So again, just because it's a financial matter and because we are a Board of Finance, just want to say that myself and, again, Mr. Kiley did have issue with options coming to a down select without actual dollars associated with them.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Questions? Other board members? Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Dwyer, when we met during the budget season, we started talking about having the Board of Ed start preparing structural changes. What was when you left here, what did you think that we wanted you to do?
I think we're doing what you asked us to do, to look at it.
Okay. I think that, I don't know about the rest of you, but I know that I thought that we were going to have the Board of Ed do that, not have a committee, number one. And number two, we're now here in November, which is 8 months past when we last met about the budget, well, at least our board met, which was in April of 2017. And this board's still being formulated. And to start having these short-term solutions, which come out mid-January, is the Board of Ed's pretty much done with their budget. I don't see how things are going to get costed out on some of those short-term things, or it's going to get costed out on the midterm stuff that comes out in April. So I think there's, at least I'm frustrated by the fact that there was such a delay by the Board of Ed in starting this process, and where we are right now, because we're sitting here right before Thanksgiving, and we don't even have a board formulated yet. We don't even have the new people that are going to be coming on throwing up their ideas into this pot of 15 possible ideas. And why did this take so long to get going?
It just took some time, that, I don't know that I have an answer for you.
It took time to start the process or to formulate did you understand what we were trying to do?
Yes?
What did you think we were trying to do? Because when you explained it to the board, I was at that meeting, I don't think that what you told them was what we kind of expected.
Yeah, I think the Board of Ed, I felt and the Board of Ed felt that our job was to take a thoughtful look at structural changes for the operation of the Fairfield Public Schools. And so chatted about how best to do that with a brand-new superintendent, and the idea of the ad hoc committee came up. So we talked about it at one meeting, formulated a commission statement, reviewed that at a second meeting, made changes based on the Board of Ed's comments, and then adopted it at the third meeting, and then started to impanel the committee. So those take time.
Okay, and the process takes time because this ad hoc committee is just here to put together a bunch of ideas that, in essence, require the approval of the Board of Ed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you guys have formed committees like this before, I can't say that I've remembered a time where you guys have voted on that and approved any of those changes in the past on past committees.
All ad hoc committees that we've formed in the past have presented a report that has to be adopted by, it doesn't have to be, the board can just reject their work, but is brought forward to the Board of Ed for final adoption.
And I can't remember many of those committees making recommendations that have been followed by the board, the past boards. It's normally that they don't follow those recommendations.
I disagree with you, but,
Okay, I'll send you some
I
examples.
mean, there's a committee that actually implemented the redistricting when we had to, when we changed the middle school. We had an ad hoc committee that worked on the educational goals. That was a report that was adopted. We don't use ad hoc committees too often, but I think when we have used them, those reports have come to the board and the board has acted on them.
In either positive or either accepting them or not accepting them.
Yeah, one way or the other.
Yeah. And if, in this regard, in regards to this committee, and I think it was Chairman Flynn, and if I'm misquoting you, let me know, we were trying to give you direction at that point in time that we didn't really want to come to the next budget season and then really start this change. We wanted to start it at the end of the next budget season because we saw dark clouds on the horizon coming, and that we wanted it to be worked on immediately by your board, not really an ad hoc committee, however that's the direction you chose to go, so that we were coming to the next budget with real structural changes. And it doesn't appear as though, at least at this point, that that's going to happen.
We're going to present a budget that meets the needs of our students and that is fiscally responsible. That's what we've done every year, and I have no doubt that Dr. Jones will present the budget this year from the same perspective.
But potentially with now no real structural changes as we requested the board look into and try to commit to. Correct?
I don't want to project that. I don't know.
Okay. it just seems as though this process, and I tell you, as you know, I was at your last two meetings, and I saw those potential 15 ideas, and Dr. Jones was good enough to put them together on a worksheet or Excel spreadsheet or some sort. I don't really see a lot of structural changes there. It was a lot of spaghetti that was thrown up against the wall, and not much of it's going to stick to create real change. I mean, suggestions like by the gentleman who's on, I forget what his name is, who was part of the union, or at least the union put him up to be their representative. His change of wanting to cut the evaluation process of teachers is not real structural change. I understand that represents what the union wants, but in regards to moving the needle in regards to the finances of the Board of Education, that does nothing. It does nothing. It could be what his union representatives want, but it's not moving the needle on the finances, which is what we were talking about. And the whole one high school, two high schools, and the suggestion of creating a brand-new one high school and using one of the high schools as, I think, a middle school and place for the Board of Education. We've gone down a certain road in regards to that, and I appreciate that you haven't wasted central administration's time in costing an idea like that out. But I'm not really seeing, and it's concerning me, that the ideas, the 15 or so ideas that have been put on are not things that are really going to move the needle. So I don't think that our board should really be expecting a lot of things so far. I'm hoping the new members will come up with some other things, but if that's what you have so far, I would start thinking a little deeper on it, because I'm not just seeing it right now. A lot of things. Are you seeing a lot of things that are going to move the needle? That's what I consider to be a structural change.
The answer is yes.
Okay, which ones would you, give me the examples of which
There
ones.
aren't 15 ideas. There's probably 25 or 30 ideas.
But some you
50
ruled out already, right?
15 of them fell into the category of relatively small changes that should be considered in annual budget development in order to present a fiscally responsible budget. Closing an elementary school, grade reconfiguration, making significant changes in the way the central office oversees programs that may be in the category of $500,000 to $1 million and more savings. Those are structural changes, but they're not the kind of, my estimation. I don't think you do a grade reconfiguration for an entire school district over the summer and implement it in the next fiscal year. There's a great deal of concern among our citizens as to neighborhood schools and how we define them and how we, and the attendance boundaries on it. And I would only call out Mr. Mottola and say, how long did it take to get a redistricting plan in place and accepted by the community and implemented? And that included with grandfathering, which meant that the savings really weren't realized for another couple of years past when it was implemented. So some of the ideas that do fall into the structural, I think, are there, and they will be studied and decided whether they are going to be pushed forward or not.
Do you see any of those ideas that are currently on your board that would bring any type of savings, significant savings? So say 250 to 500,000 or more savings this coming budget season.
You're asking me to contemplate the budget that has not yet been developed.
I'm just talking about the ideas themselves, things that would save money for this coming budget season we're going to be looking at, because I don't see any on there, but maybe I'm mistaken, so that's why I'm asking you your opinion, since you've been in this role for a while.
The answer is yes. I do
Which-
believe that there are ideas that, if needed, could be implemented for this next budget season, if needed, in order to meet the needs of students, but present a budget in a fiscally responsible manner.
So if they're not needed, you're not going to Well,
we
you're only
re-
one member, I understand that.
Correct.
So, but if they're not needed, you're not going to propose them or vote in favor of them.
The budget starts with the staff, so I think first the staff have to present a budget, and then the board in January reviews it. And I think it would be hard for me to contemplate what the new board, with so many new members on it, might do during that budget review process.
Yeah, that's why I was just asking your individual opinion on the ones that are presented, because I don't see any that have been discussed that are real
We don't know what the proposals are.
structural changes for the coming budget season, and I'm just trying to reset this board so we know what's going on. That I'm not seeing any that are on.
Well,
this.
I'll use one. I don't,
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Which is, I personally don't know what you're referring to, Mr. Walsh. I don't know the 15 ideas. I wasn't at the meetings. I think it's not quite appropriate for us to be stating an opinion when the rest of the board may have no idea what those proposals are.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking
Perhaps
you.
we
It's
get
fine.
an update. What I did hear from our superintendent is that she and her staff are currently reviewing approximately 15 proposals. They may not save us a ton of money, but this process is a process, and you are reviewing some preliminary proposals.
they're reviewing 25 to 30
25 to
ideas,
30, excuse me.
of which 15 are relatively what I call small budget costs items, maybe 50 to 250,000, that could be considered by the staff when they recommend a budget for next year, in order to present a fiscally responsible budget.
But they haven't been estimated, so.
Right, and we
Some-
don't know
some-
the specifics about what the proposals are, so it's hard for me to kind of
guess
be
what-
involved in a
Some have
discussion
been
or
estimated.
dialogue without knowing what they are and judging their worth or not. Does that make
Well,
sense?
It does, although I don't know that it's whether it's our job to judge their worth or not. I think what it comes down to is, and I was the one, or one of the ones that kicked this off last spring. We're going to face significant fiscal pressures over the next several years. And we need to be prepared for those fiscal pressures. So everyone should be looking at all times, needed or not, to present a fiscally responsible budget delivering the services. The question is whether we're prepared for that for this budget cycle, or whether we're going to hear, we need more time, we need another year, we need another year. And we're running out of runway, is the way that I would say it. Now, I don't want to speak for you. It was your line of questioning. But the reason I allowed the questioning to continue is I want to know that we're actually using this time to come up with appropriate plans to protect the taxpayer, I got you, and to protect the students.
And can I comment on that? I
You
believe that we are.
absolutely can.
I believe that we are. I know that some of the comments have suggested that we're not doing anything.
I don't think anybody's suggesting you're not doing any, I didn't hear that.
Inferred that our board took a lot of initiatives in the area of healthcare to bend the healthcare cost curve over 3 different budget years. When Dr. Tyler was here, he consistently looked at new ways to configure the central office staff in order to present a fiscally responsible budget. Dr. Jones, in her first look at what ideas should be considered in order to balance the budget following the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM review last year, put together a very clear list of Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 ideas. And some of the ideas that are on the committee's list came from that Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 ideas. Our staff are constantly looking at a better way to run this railroad.
I think that's a fair comment. I do. I think that's a fair comment. But let me pose something. What was your spending increase last year? Dr. Jones?
A little under 2 is what was approved. 1.7.
1.7. Okay. If we lose several percentage points off what the state gives us, with a 1.7 increase, you could be looking at, to the taxpayer, a 3.7 increase to fund education, if you lose 2 points. I mean, that's the type of thing that's scaring the bejeebus out of everybody here, is the fact that it's not about, that we're not trying to do everything. It's the fact that without looking at some of the underlying issues, a 1.7 increase represents a 3.7 to the town, perhaps, depending on what's going on with funding. So while what we've been doing is good, and I do give credit both to the current administration and the past administration, we're raising the flag saying, even if we do that, it's still going to be a big chunk to our taxpayers potentially, and that scares us. And Mr. Mottola, you've been, and then I'm going back to Mr. Walsh because I think he got cut off.
I guess what I want to say is that we throw out this term structural change, and I, for one, didn't think in a one-year time period there was going to be this great structural change revelation from the Board of Education, because we're talking about 10,000 students. We're talking about making sure that we're satisfying and meeting the needs of those students. And quite frankly, I don't think it was going to, I didn't think it was going to happen overnight, like I guess some members on this board have been thinking it was going to happen. And I think it's important to carefully study it, because if we make a mistake, just because we want to try to save a buck, and we screw it up, it's going to cost us more money 5 to 10 years from now. So, you know, the bottom line is we may have to make a decision in March whether or not we want to pay for some of this. And it's going to be our decision and the other elected body decisions. I think you need to do what you're doing. Be careful, be diligent about it. Go as quickly as you can, but don't just do it for the sake of doing it, because this is too important. So, I mean, we throw out this term structural change, and I appreciate what we're trying to do here, but it's a very important critical issue, and we have to do it right. And I'm in agreement with you. We're going to have a tough budget year this year, and we're going to have to make some tough choices. But you know what? Maybe the bottom line is we're going to have to pay for it this year. I don't know.
What does that mean, pay for it?
It means we value education in this town. They've come in year after year, lean, every year for several years now. And, you know, maybe one year we got to bite the bullet because we value this. I'm not saying we do it that way, but it's something that we have to
I just
consider.
wanted to understand what you meant by pay for it, whether you meant pay for the change or pay for it, meaning
You know,
fund
maybe
it
we're not
because
getting as
ready.
much money from the state, and maybe the people in this town understand that. I know they don't like it, but maybe because I think most people in this town value education, they may, for this year, while they're doing the structural changes, looking at it, trying to save money, maybe for this coming year, it's something that we need to bite the bullet. That's all I'm saying. Hopefully not. I don't know. But I wasn't under the impression that when we were going through the last budget season that we were going to have these great structural changes coming forth from the Board of Education for this upcoming year, because I knew it was going to take some time to do it. I mean, I was on the Board of Education for 6 years, and for a variety of reasons, things don't happen very quickly. I think, if I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, the superintendent started speaking about raising class sizes on her own and got her head chopped off. Remember that? Do you remember that? Just happened a few months ago. So, it's tough, and we have to be patient here and be diligent and be rational about what we're doing here. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, back to you, because I think you got cut off.
Sure. And Mr. Flynn, I agree with your comments about, you know, it's not going to be rosy for the next number of years, but we've got to start someplace, and I was hoping that, and I'm still hoping that there will be some type of changes, not all of them. I understand that some of them, if they make a bigger decision, might take some years to implement, and there has been times when we've done it, implemented certain changes that we knew were going to be more expensive the first year or two in order to save money down the way. But I was hoping we'd be further down the line with this, that we would have started this process sooner, that we'd be a little bit further down the line, because we got basically going to have new members starting in December, and we have a budget by the board that's supposed to come out in January, and it concerns me, and it'll, you know, I hope for the best, and I hope that things improve and more ideas get on the table. more ideas, because I'm not seeing a lot of structural change ideas. I'm seeing a lot of ideas. Dr. Jones, can you just send that to all of our members, that current list that you have? Because I know you guys have been keeping track of it. And
I think the list that you're talking about is the one that she presented to the ad hoc committee.
I think it was at the second meeting.
Yeah, at the second
Yes.
meeting.
Yes.
And also the minutes of the 2 meetings are on the website, which also kind of describes some of it, so we can get that to you.
Okay. Did you take some of those items and already remove them or put them in a separate column? I thought that's what I heard when I was at the second meeting.
Some of the ideas that were brought forward were actually
First meeting,
ideas that were part of the 2.3 million on hold items.
Right.
So yes, some of those ideas have already been implemented.
Yeah.
Not as a permanent cut to the budget, but on hold.
Okay. So if you can get us those ideas in that spreadsheet, that would be a good start to see, for this board to see where we are so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sesman.
Just want to add some comments. I think one of the challenges you face is if you look at our standing in the state of per pupil expenditures, we run a really efficient budget. We don't have a lot of low-hanging fruit. So while it may be daunting for the public to think about that 3.7, I agree with, the chairman, it's also daunting to think of, in order to be budget neutral, what are we going to eliminate? How are we going to, I'm sorry to say this, devalue our education program? So there's no easy, that's not the easy way to get to the 3.7 if that's what we're talking about, and everyone's going to be satisfied. I think there's some great concern about that. That's what I hear. I want to, represent the concerns that I hear from people that I consider my constituents. So thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate the hard work you're putting into it and how difficult a task this is.
Thank
The
you.
reason that Connecticut is known as the land of steady habits is because change is difficult by some people, and it takes a thoughtful process to present it so that it's acceptable to the town, that they still see that they're getting a value education, just that it's going to cost us less.
I don't think anybody thinks that change is going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
But I think we need to understand that it's got to start, it's got to be diligent, and it's got to be with a time frame. And that time frame, to Mr. Mottola's point, on this side might not be 1 year, okay, but it's pretty darn soon. And we've been looking at a train coming down the tracks for the last couple of years. We've been able to pull some rabbits out of hats, working collectively, doing some creative accounting and creative financing, pulling things forward. Those tricks are running out. There's very few places to go now, except the pockets of our taxpayers. And they're pretty well tapped out, too. And if certain proposals that are on at the state level and at the federal level go through, they're going to be even more tapped out. And I'm concerned not just what that does to our taxpayers, but what that does to them being able to stay in town. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to work together to find the solutions. And to Mr. Walsh's point, I don't care how we put it, I want to see more of a sense of urgency about that. And that doesn't mean we don't go about a thoughtful, deliberative process, but it means we go about a process that's going to move and going to create results. Because if you're not, and I don't mean you, I mean anybody is not willing to change, change is forced upon them. And I don't think any of us in the room want that, where we're making multi-million-dollar decisions and saying, now go figure it out. And 90 days is good. So I think it's got to move forward diligently. And I don't know what the answers are, and thank God I don't have to provide them. I just can see that freight train coming down the track. That's all. Anybody else?
Just one last thing in regards to Ms. Esmond's statement. I would like to basically congratulate Dr. Jones and your staff and, Dr. Title and his staff in regards to the fact that we have become more efficient with spending. And just because we don't have the highest per pupil expenditure, whether in our county or other measurements, our students continue to excel, test scores to continue to excel. So those dollars have not really hurt the children at all in regards to finding those efficiencies. And I would hope that you continue to do that as we look for ways to try to find it to be even more efficient. Thanks.
Anybody else? Mr. Becker?
Yeah, and I would just say there was a comment, I think, about the if needed in regards to this. I think the answer is very clear. If there are short-term things, even if they only added up to, a couple $100,000, we know now that they are needed, because there's going to be, it's very clear that this next budget, that there's going to be either a larger size increase on the taxation, or there's going to be cuts that ultimately could lead to program reductions, and nobody really wants to have either of those happen. And the only way you're going to get there is driving to any level of efficiency. So the larger things, I think everyone has known that those are going to take time, that there's going to be a lot more weeding through them, costing them out, putting them in place. But if there are even 2 or 3 $50,000 to $75,000 items, it isn't wait to determine if it's needed in 3 months. We know that they're needed. Do what we can now, and I think that gets back to right after budget saying to start focusing on this. So here we are in November. Don't lose a single day on trying to put even a few of those together, because a couple $100,000 can be a program, and the reduction of even, or moving the needle on the tax rate. So I think we just need to really try to not lose time on that, and I worry that that's occurring even on those little things, which is really, I think, what a lot of people, the only expectation for near term is that it's probably, for this budget, not going to be massive, but that something exists out there.
The if needed related more to the larger ticket items in my mind when I was talking. Every year, both the first selectman and the superintendent construct a budget, and between the time they get the budget requests in and the time it actually is given publicly, there are a lot of tough decisions in the category of 25,000 here, 75,000 here, that are made by the first selectman's office, by the superintendent's office, and implemented. You never see them because they're decisions that are made in the construction of the original budget. Then once that happens, then further decisions sometimes have to be made between the time of presenting it to the Board of Ed and the RTM finally voting on it. So I think this is it's a process that those things are considered either at the staff level or at the board level.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Dwyer.
Thank you.
And Mr. Brown?
Mr. Dwyer, do you remember years ago when you thought you were ready to go, right?
No, I thought that when the chairman said thank you, I thought that meant that.
I'm sneaking in one last question here. Years ago, I think you probably were on the board, there was an outside firm that came in and did a study on our school system. I was on the board. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so
You're talking about the operational audit? Yes.
they presented various ideas. Some were larger, some were not. Some were adopted, some were not. You know, a suggestion might be to go back and look at that study and see what they suggested that we did not take upon. There was talk about restructuring the high schools, not closing, but, you know, how they're run. There was, it gave some structural ideas, houses. And again, we're not saying, and I'm certainly not saying what's right or wrong, but I don't know if your committee had taken a look at what was presented from that outside firm, but it might behoove you to do so.
Not a detailed look, but some of the ideas, as you say, were implemented. Some, the outside consulting firm put numbers on that when Dr. Title looked at it and said, no, you're not going to save that amount because they didn't take into consideration X, Y, and Z, and so that kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. There were probably 2 or 3 central ideas that were not implemented because it wasn't considered that it would change the quality of our service. The system of housemasters in the high school was a suggestion that was not implemented. The curriculum coordinators at the central office was a significant idea that was mentioned. The number of guidance counselors, I think, was suggested. There was even a suggestion that we needed to add a central office staff person, and that was not implemented. That was not a savings, that was actually a cost. So yeah, that study still exists, and actually the Q&A responses that Dr. Teitel gave at the time, I believe are still carried on in the archives of our website.
Yeah. My only suggestion is it may be not a bad idea to take a look again and see what they said. It might spur more ideas.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, any others? Seeing none,
And
thank
you
you
do
very
want
much.
us to stay for a while.
Just for the town side, if you don't mind, just because we tend to have conversations that bring it back to you guys at one point or another. We'll try to be briefer, let's put it that way. Okay, item number 3 on our agenda, to review the abbreviated town Q1 fiscal 2018 financial position. We got an updated schedule this evening that Ms. Bossi passed out as we were sitting here. It is not because it was late, it was because it was late-breaking news from our friend the governor. So we'll turn it over to Mr. Mayor and Ms. Bossi to talk to us about the executive summary. Go right ahead. And for everyone, it's this page. And again, there was an updated page given tonight. So go right ahead.
Just to start off with, I just want to let you know that the only change was to that state revenue number.
Right. Can you bring the mic up a little bit, if you don't mind, Caitlin? Thank you.
We can start off with the revenue if anyone has any questions on it. Current prior year favorable 574.
What is that 574? What is that 574 based on? Is that because prior year levy is better, collections are running?
From what I believe, there's two pieces to it. There's a 74,000 favorable in the senior tax relief, and about a 500 in the collection rate impact. Looking at the 3-year average versus what was budgeted in 18.
And we're doing better?
Yes.
Okay. Questions on that one, anyone? That's a significant number for us. Okay.
Next couple, town clerk revenue, slight unfavorable, projected by our town clerk.
How's that figured out?
She emailed
At an
me
average?
and told me, how was it budgeted?
Yeah,
I believe it's
I
a
understand what's
3-year.
budgeted. I don't understand how, did she just give you that number, the 75, or did she do an average of the whole year?
She
And
gave
then-
me the 75, saying she thought as of September 30, she was going to be 75 under budget for conveyance.
Okay, has she been accurate so
she's
far?
she's estimating, I think, a 1.8, and I think the budget is 1.875.
It seems like we go through this, and then the number always ends up to be the opposite way. Like, we get these negative numbers, and then on the conveyance taxes, they always seem to be more.
Okay.
So,
Those are department heads giving me their projection as of September 30 for this number.
so does she do we don't know whether she does an average, whether she just comes up with a number somehow?
I don't know how she calculated her 75.
All right, would we be able to find that out? I guess I could call her, I guess.
I could follow up with her if you want.
Okay.
And this is, just, I ask this every year, or every time we go through this. This is the projection for the whole year.
Correct.
So as of September 30th, our town clerk
Correct.
believe will be $75,000 under what we projected in the budget.
Correct.
Right, thank you.
The next one is clearly the big one, the negative 924. And I did give you a backup sheet as to where that's coming from. The previous number was a negative 32, I believe. So really, the state hit us between the adopted budget and what they call the allocated budget for additional 892 that we just found out about this past weekend. The biggest hit to that was the pilot, and we did in fact receive the $1,071,000 today.
Okay, which is the abbreviated amount.
Correct.
And just so that board members are aware, has everyone been following what's also happened the last couple of days with the state budget related to the weakness in revenues, which may be able to cause the governor or give him the rights to cut further municipal aid? Is that correct? I'm
That's
saying it
correct,
correctly.
and as Mr. DeWitt pointed out earlier, we do have the 1475 from last year. These are strictly operational for fiscal 18,
Right.
which is why I didn't include it.
Right.
But yes, we're,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's so damn confusing to figure out what's going on up there. But then I heard something that somebody said that we haven't received the federal contribution yet, so that could still, do you remember somebody
I
saying
did
that?
not actually hear
I
that.
heard, I think it was somebody from Norwalk said something, one of the state.
There's
reps.
$100,000 Medicaid money hasn't been received.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
For the town?
for the town.
All right.
Okay. Sure, thank you, Mr. Matola. Anybody else? Anybody on this
Medicaid.
specific
Did I
comment?
say Medicare? I meant Medicaid.
No, you said Medicaid. I think you did. Go ahead, Mrs. Bossy.
okay, the next one, favorability in the Park and Rec revenue, mostly related to some minor fee increases. And same with the 56 again, is the permit fee increases projected for health and TPZ.
And these were all done after the budget was
These
paid.
are actually going to be effective, I believe these are January 1st of 18, so it's actually half a year.
Okay. Anybody questions on those items? Go right ahead then.
Okay, on the expense side, the operational savings is projected at this time to be 417, which is broken out into a couple categories. You'll see on the left, the vacancies, the fire injury, and there's a couple smaller other items, which included a berm, utilities, smaller, some favorable, some unfavorable, netting out to a negative 92.
Questions on the operational savings? This has nothing to do with anything being carried forward to your earlier point from prior years,
This is
right?
strictly operational for 18.
Right. Mr. Walsh?
And these vacancies are expected to stay vacancies for the remainder of the year, correct?
No, the vacancy number is a combination of the dollars that were saved by cutting the library hours from July 1 through approximately early to mid-January, when it's anticipated the library would go back to its regular hours, or
Okay.
its prior hours. That plus we are holding 4 positions vacant in DPW for the whole year.
In what?
DPW. So it's a combination of those two factors.
And are those vacancies going to be held until we know what's going on with the state and how revenues are going with the state? And
The ones with DPW are at this point on hold permanently, I won't say permanently, but until we learn more. The library, as I indicated, those hours are being restored for going to what I will call the normal hours structure, the middle of January.
So this number's not going to hold?
No, that number is that number.
Okay. So that's with it being restored?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's, I guess, the question I have.
So what happens if the state cuts us by another $1 million due to the shortfall?
Well, I guess.
And when will we know that? Do we know? I mean, by December 1st, they have to quote-unquote certify the shortfall in revenue, right?
Well, there's a couple of things. Whenever there's an anticipated 1% or greater
Yep.
budget shortfall anytime during the year, then the governor has the authority to go in, or the responsibility, I guess, and the authority.
Yeah, but I
to
thought
go
there
in
was
and make
something that they said
adjustments.
that it's got to be certified by the powers that be by December 1st. So December 1st, he'll know whether he's got to do that.
That's for right now, correct?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And I think the magic number is 208 million or something like that. And
That's
the
right.
current number is 182 or something, so.
I
But
thought
they're
it was
refining
over,
that.
actually.
Yeah.
What's the, okay, so let's say that happens and we get hit again. Where are we going to find that savings?
Well, as you can see it from the schedule, assuming that everything else in the schedule holds, that we have a net favorable variance of $1 million from operations that would cover the next million.
Yeah, but that $1 million is largely just not doing any paving, correct? Or cutting $1
It's
million
doing half the
dollars.
paving.
So it's basically,
there's-
we've prioritized and said, or the administration has prioritized and said, if we get cut enough, we're going to stop paving.
Yeah, paving is actually in 2 line items.
Yep.
One line item is maintenance,
Yep.
which has not been touched. That will be, that is not on hold at all. And then the other line item is not, I guess, new paving, repaving. That's the one that's $2 million, which has the $1 million currently on hold.
So right now, the administration would say if we got cut again and we needed to dip into this, the $1 million would come from paving.
From paving. Yeah, unless Scott comes in and says there's something drastic it needs. I mean, there are other items potentially that are also currently on hold, but not on a strong hold, for lack of a better term. But no, they can't buy them without approval from my office.
Okay, questions, follow-ups from anyone on this item right now?
So if getting back to your earlier question, if we get hit for another $1 million, let's say $1.5 million, are we going to switch what we do with the vacancies?
No, those are decisions that would be made as information comes available. I mean, as of right now, I mean, this is a dynamic document. I mean, I play with numbers. It seems like with respect to the state budget and our budget, daily.
Mm-hmm.
This is today's sheet.
And what is the fire injury for $159,000?
That's worst-case scenario. There's 3 injured at the fire department right now.
Yeah.
So one of them, they're expecting to be about another month. The other 2 is worst-case scenario if they're out for the rest of the year.
Okay, and that's overtime money?
Correct.
Were these injuries that happened at fire locations or something else?
I don't know.
Okay. Bob, do you know? I mean, I presume you've asked the question.
They did not happen in fires, but I don't know how they happened.
You don't know how they
But
happened?
they're injured. I
Okay.
mean, yeah, I mean, if you break your leg playing tennis, you're injured.
Anybody else? Mr. Walsh, you have anything? Oh, Mr. DeWitt, please.
I just want to be clear, what you just asked, Mr. Chairman, about the next $1 million if it comes. At what point do we start dipping into the 1.475? I mean, that is there, right? Would we not
That is
think
a
about
correct statement.
would we not consider that before reducing a service to town?
That would be a decision that would be made by the administration. Yes, sir. Yeah,
I understand your
mean,
answer. Looking at what we're looking at right now, the only answer really is paving, so understandable, right?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Anyone else? All right. Thank you.
So, given those figures, obviously, the net estimated variance is about $1.1 million, and our budgeted contribution to surplus is the $538, giving us an estimated increase in fund balance as of today of $1,650,000.
Okay, any questions? So what percentage would that be of our current budget?
I didn't look at it as our final 17 isn't completed yet, so
Okay.
I didn't want to
Estimate?
estimate, given that number's not final, so then I would have to tack on another 1,650,
Okay,
so.
very good. All right, thank you. Just jumping in, so where are we? Are we on the next one? Okay, Brian, where are we going to start?
Mr. Brown, may I
Yes.
interrupt you for 1 moment? Does that mean we're done?
Does anyone see a reason for the Board of Ed to stay?
I think the chairman said he just wanted them to stay there during the town's presentation
Yeah.
of the quarterly.
You're free to go.
Brian was part of the town.
No, he's not. No, I think you can. Basically, I think you can leave. I think
Yeah,
Tom
you're
said
free to
he
go.
just wanted you there for the town's quarterly presentation.
You can go crunch some numbers in your office.
Right.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay, Brian, where are we going to start?
With the joint pension numbers, so the ones not OPEB. First page, you can see assets stand at 385 million, which is up
Did you steal my?
at least from the August numbers. And looking at returns, which are on the next two pages.
I just took mine.
You can see that fiscal year-to-date, we're up 3%. Which is in line with the markets seem to continue on their merry way upward.
Let's hope.
I'm not into the hope game. Looking at OPEB, 36 million at this point. And the returns are a little better because it's more equity weighted, so 3.85 or 3.84, sorry, fiscal year to date.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Vahey on either the analysis? I went through it myself earlier. Not much has changed from prior quarters, but any specific questions related to investment allocations, any risk concerns, any rate of return concerns? Anyone?
In regards to, Brian, in regards to the commodities, at least on the pension fund, has there been any discussion by your board about reducing that allocation?
No,
Okay, why not?
because it's part of our strategic allocation.
Okay. And even though we've somewhat consistently had reductions or losses in that area, in the commodities area,
So, and you're,
No, excuse
so what
me.
are you suggesting?
whether at some point in time do you just start reducing your allocation because you've,
So usually when equities go up, bonds go down, so would we get rid of our bonds when that happens? We come up with this plan based on looking at all the asset classes and their correlations to one another, and that's how you get a diversified portfolio. So we don't expect all of our assets classes to go up at the same time.
okay, just seems like commodities have been down consistently for
They're there
at
to
least if
provide an
you have the
inflation
last
hedge. and
60
they're-
months.
Right. They're there to provide an inflation hedge
Mhm.
and to provide diversification. They're not a correlated asset. You have inflation risk in the portfolio, and the fact that we give, the benefits are indexed to inflation. There's not many ways you can get an inflation exposure in commodities. And I don't know if you've noticed, but
I
we
didn't
really
hear the
haven't
last
had much.
sentence you said.
Well, there's not a whole lot of asset classes that'll give you inflation protection. Tips, commodities. So, and we haven't had a lot of inflation, so hence commodities really haven't been going anywhere. The manager we have has been outperforming, which is great.
Yeah.
Other questions? Mr. Vahey, is there an experience study going on now where there's some assumptions being looked at for this coming fiscal year? I've lost track, to be very honest. But we were looking at some of the assumptions and some of the go-forward projections with the actuaries related to both OPEB and pension. Is that not correct?
Experience study is done, it's completed, and it's in our numbers, as is the
Wait,
reduction
I
of the...
missed that last part. Experience study is done?
Done, completed, is in our numbers, as is the reduction of the discount rate to 7.0.
Okay. That will be done and calculated for whatever our contributions need to be for the next fiscal cycle. Is that correct?
That is correct.
When will we get that information?
Well, I think you officially get it the first or second budget session.
Do you have it now?
It might be close. I mean, I can produce a number, I'm not sure it's going to be the exact number.
I think in the past, like at best, we were going to get it in November when we were doing sort of the experience day stuff. And it
Exactly.
usually, at best, it's
Right.
not a normal thing. And usually because of the holidays, we start seeing it in January.
So by January, which was my thought was it was December or January, we would see a number, and we would know whether it was going up or down relative to last year. And that's what I'm trying to get to as we look at budget.
I think the number is going to, I haven't looked at that recently, but my recollection of the information, the number's not going to change significantly.
That what our contribution is in this fiscal year
Right.
will be close till next
I
fiscal.
believe so. I'll confirm that in an email tomorrow.
Okay. And that is with any adjustment in the rate of return for this coming fiscal
That
year?
is correct,
Okay.
yeah.
Do we have other adjustments in the assumptions that we can actually just understand what they are?
No, I mean, it's all been baked in with the new discount rate and the experience study, so everything's baked in. The only thing that's going to drive anything would be your rate of return, and we're still, if you look at,
7, I think, on the,
Well, there's, obviously, we have some positive news on the returns,
of course.
and we have some negative news. I don't remember exactly what, and I don't remember how much, because it hasn't been totally quantified. That's why I'm saying, but as of right now, my gut is they're pretty much equal, but that's,
Can we just enumerate out what if there's been any changes to some of the other assumptions, what those changes actually were, just so that we can follow, hey, because we've been pressuring, and Brian, I know you guys have been working on bringing down the assumed rate of return, right? You were at 7.5 at one point, you're at 7 now, right?
but the assumptions are all measured assumptions. I mean,
I know that, I just want to know if
If I
we
say
changed them.
measured, no, we haven't changed them. They're based upon experience. In other words,
Retirement age and all that,
all that
kept
stuff,
that all
it's all
consistent.
based upon experience, like,
That's fine, I'd
if
like-
it's changed a little bit.
Can we see what those were?
Yeah, okay.
All right.
and there was do you still have a question about the IPS and the manager exposures?
Yeah, what's going on there? I saw that you're right around 10% on some of them, right? But it's like BlackRock.
That's not a limit. So it was, to be clear, our limit for any individual manager on an asset class is 15% or 2/3 of the allocation to that asset class, whichever is greater.
Now, see, that's a little different than my understanding from previous conversations going back, because after the Madoff situation, there was a question over, and it wasn't a limit, it was a guideline, right? And there's obvious exceptions like BlackRock, right? But there were some guidelines placed that we would try to stay below or at about 10% for some of them.
Right, so,
And I'm not saying you've exceeded it. I'm saying I just wanted to know that that was one of the guidelines you guys had in place, right?
the guideline is, as I just stated it, it's in our IPS.
Okay, that's not what I remember. So
I mean,
you're,
it would be impossible, so what you're referring to would be a hedge fund having 15% with a target of 5%. We could.
what do you mean? Well, I never said that. I meant 10% of the total overall. What are you referring to?
So I just, at the limit that I just explained, I said it's 15% or 2/3 of the target allocation, whichever is greater.
15% of what? Of the total asset value of 385 million? Or
Correct.
15% of that asset class?
Correct.
So you would put 15%, now I see BlackRock's got 17%.
Correct, because it does not apply to index managers.
Right. So, which we've talked about before, and I get that on BlackRock. But what you're saying is the quote-unquote, is it a guideline or a limit of 15%?
It's in our IPS that it's a limit.
Okay. Questions from board members? Yes, Ms. Esner.
Thanks, Brian. Slightly more macro type of question, but, so we're about to see a change, a new Fed chair, possibly monetary policy, more specifically interest rates, and then eventually maybe some market impact on the markets. I mean, do you have any general opinion about the direction we may take as a result of that, or just knowing who the new Fed chair
Pollen is,
might be?
he's as much a Yellen clone as you could get.
Mm.
So I don't expect to see any major changes, except on the regulatory front, which is not really germane necessarily to what, we're going to see in
Right.
investment returns. But
Thanks.
I will say that the yield curve is flattening, which is I'm personally keeping an eye on it. I mean, I think we're at inside 60 basis points from 2s to 10s. It's not a good thing. Fixed income markets are generally the canary in the coal mine as far as overall capital markets, and they're not painting any anticipation for robust growth by that 10-year sort of staying anchored, and the front end is coming up because the Fed is moving up. So if that goes to zero or inverts, if it inverts, we're going to have a recession. It's just how it is, and that generally will affect the equity markets. So, but you know, we're situated to ride through it with what we have. I mean, we you know, we're diversified. It's going to be what it's going to be.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Walsh?
Brian, following the Madoff situation, there were certain insurances, I think D&O insurances we required all of our fund managers and stuff to have. Who monitors that on a yearly basis to make sure that we get those insurance certificates?
Our consultant does, and it's part of our annual review, which is December.
Okay, so they'll tell you the insurance is in place and give a presentation on that?
We don't ask for a presentation. They just, you know, we just talk about it. We don't, I mean.
You just asked the question, have you received all the insurances that we require?
Yeah, and we really don't hire a manager unless they already have them in place, so it would be, they'd have to have dropped it somehow. So, I mean, all the names, we don't have any, what I would call non-mainstream managers, but yeah, we've actually just talked about that recently, as far as, you know, making sure, what we do at our annual review, what sort of things we cover. And we're also covering costs this year.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, we'll go on to item number 5. To hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to transfer $429,894 from the general fund contingency to various accounts per the attached schedule in fiscal year 2018 for the PETA contract settlement. I'm going to read these all. And to transfer $36,127 from the WPCA contingencies to various WPCA accounts per the attached schedule in fiscal year 2018 for the PETA contract settlement. And to transfer $163,670 from the general fund contingency to various accounts per the attached schedule in fiscal year 18 for the nurses contract settlement. And to transfer $66,353 from the general fund contingency to various accounts per the attached schedule fiscal year 2018 for the ECC contract settlement. Can I have a motion to put that before us? I'll take Mrs. Esma, a second by Mr. Walsh. The item is now before us. This schedule, just for clarity, the schedules are these attached schedules so that there's no confusion. Is there any questions, comments from board members for Mr. Mayor on this item? This is due to contract settlements, transferring funds that were put aside in our contingency accounts for the anticipated settlement of these contracts. Questions, comments from anyone? Mrs. Leclerc.
Could you just give us a summary of what the contracts contained when they were settled and like what kind of increases these represent?
The average increase is about 2% on the salary line, and there was some give-backs on other lines, like increased healthcare contributions and possibly increased OPEB contributions and things like that.
So what time frame does this represent? Like the contract was settled this year, and so
Well, the
how
contracts-
far back does this go?
The PETA contract last expired in June of 13. The nurses and ECC contracts last expired in June of 14. So as of right now, we have 2 contracts still open, DPW and police. And THEA, 3, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, I'm going to bring this item to a vote. All in favor of approving these transfers? Those opposed, abstentions, that item carries. Thank you very much.
Quick question, Mr.
Yes, go ahead, Mr.
What's our
DeWitt.
new contingency number after these transfers? With deep, if I, just make sure I heard you correctly, with DPW, Thea, and police contracts still open, correct?
Right, yeah, I don't have that off the top of my head.
Can we follow back up with that and send that around, please? Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any others? Seeing none, item number 6 is 3 updates on items we've discussed previously. The first is to hear status report on the Strategic Planning Committee. You'll recall that this board has been asking for a strategic plan to review all town operations for several years. It's fantastic that it's been put together. Thanks to the Board of Selectmen for following our thoughts on this and making it a reality. And Mr. Wynn, you're here as the chairman of this committee, so thank you for stepping up to the plate to do that and representing your committee as well as being here tonight.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me. As Mr. Flynn mentioned, my name is John Wynn. I'm on the Strategic Plan Committee, and I'm currently serving as chair of that committee. We submitted some information along with your advance package to outline just basically a status as to where we are as a committee. So if it's okay, I'll take everyone through it unless there's any opening questions before we start.
Why don't we, I had the opportunity to look through your presentation. Thank you for having it provided in advance. Why don't you step us through it, and we'll save the questions to the end,
Okay, very good.
if you don't mind?
So
Thanks.
on page 2, I've outlined a set of topics I'll take you through: basic introduction, who we are, what we're doing, the work activities we've completed to date. Go into a little bit greater detail on the proposals we've received for a consultant to help us develop our strategic plan, what we'll be doing next in the next 30, 60, 90 days, and then go through any questions that you may have. So moving to page 3. As Mr. Flynn mentioned, the Board of Selectmen, in consultation with other town boards, determined a strategic plan would benefit the longer-term planning needs of the town. There was an invitation put out for residents to submit their backgrounds and profiles to participate on the board. The committee was appointed by the Board of Selectmen in May, sworn in, and we began our monthly meetings in June. Each one of our meetings are public noticed. We compile meeting minutes, et cetera, all available through our website, and I'll go through that in a minute. Committee members are listed here on the bottom part of the page. I won't go through them individually, but if anyone has any questions on individuals, I'm happy to go through their backgrounds or provide any supplemental detail either here or elsewhere. Page 4 basically enumerates the charge that was developed by the Board of Selectmen in consultation, I believe, with the Board of Finance and possibly other boards and commissions in the town. Some of the initial things were to engage a planning consultant and coordinate the development of an RFP through town purchasing or procurement, develop a process for completing the plan, provide regular updates on a quarterly basis to the Board of Selectmen and other town committees as requested. In doing so, the charge indicated that we should leverage leading practices from other communities that had developed a strategic plan. So we did some research to make sure we had a comprehensive and thorough RFP. And also, we're going to understand what a strategic plan might look like when we have it completed. We've compiled that information for both the RFPs and the example plans from other communities, and it's available through our website as well if anyone was interested. One of the key success factors that was discussed was the utilizing approaches to gather stakeholder input so that we make sure we have an informed citizenry and allow them to participate, submit their ideas, make sure that we're really going to have the right kind of buy-in to a strategic plan, because without that type of buy-in, then it really would never be successful. And then also adapt the committee. We presently have 7 members, but we might add some to the committee, or might adapt how we work if we need to break into smaller subcommittees, depending on what advice we receive from the consultant that we'll be engaging. Moving on to page 5. The work that we've done so far, as I mentioned, we elected officers to manage our committee's activities. We've held monthly meetings. Minutes are available. We did the research that I described. We launched our webpage to begin the initial public outreach and information and allow them to understand what a strategic plan is, the process we would be going through, the results of the research that we did. We also had to develop an RFP. The RFP was prepared, submitted to the market, and we received back 8 proposals from potential providers. Each of the proposals had some interesting aspects. Some were very, very qualified, some less qualified, and that's probably pretty typical of what you would expect when you put a proposal, or an RFP out into the marketplace. Moving over to page 6. So we issued the RFP in mid-October. As I mentioned, we received back 8 proposals. Each of them had interesting aspects. We're in the process of evaluating them. So we're reviewing each of the proposals in detail. We're evaluating them using the criteria we identified in the RFP. We're doing some other due diligence in that we're looking at sample plans that those entities had submitted or referenced to us. We're doing some reference checking, some interviews, and some other discussion. We really do believe that all aspects of what we outlined in the RFP should be able to be achieved with the providers that submitted proposals for us. Our target is to begin work in early 2018. So we're going to complete our review and selection process during the month of December and try and get the consultant on board and working with us in January at some point. General time frame is probably 1 year, plus or minus, to complete it. Strategic plans are not typically something you can really do in 2 or 3 months. You need a little bit longer time, particularly when you want to get adequate amount of community involvement and community input. So best guess is 1 year, as I mentioned. We recognize the need to balance speed in completing it with thoroughness and comprehensiveness of the plan. So there is a balance there. We do recognize that. Moving over to the next page. As I mentioned, we'll narrow the field of contenders from 8 down to probably 2 or 3 that we'll do a more detailed interview with to make sure the firms that submitted proposals I've identified here. One of the guidances that we received from the Board of Selectmen when we updated them in August was, don't look just for local firms, look for firms outside of the area that might bring new and innovative ideas. So with the responses that we received, what we did note is that there are several, I wouldn't quite call them national firms, but they're relatively large firms, but they also know our area, the Northeast, the state of Connecticut, some down to our county. So we think we're getting a good balance between larger firms with new ideas and firms that know our area and what the needs of this area might be. Moving over to page 8. What I've done here is identify the steps that we're going to be doing next, and in the parenthetical disclosure to the right, I identify a general time frame when we will be doing that. So complete the selection process and award the project by January. Keep looking at current events. We recognize that current events are impacting Fairfield, current events here in the state from an economic standpoint, from a tax standpoint. We want to field the consulting team and begin the plan in January to February. Begin project activities to advance community engagement in the February-March timeframe, continue our regular meeting schedule, and respond to the Board of Selectmen requests for updates, to your committee for updates, and anyone else as requested. I would see us beneficially engaging with the RTM when the new RTM is fielded, and to begin to get input from you, from the RTM, from any other constituencies here in town. And we certainly, all of the respondents to the RFP did identify an interest and a need to interview town officials, elected officials, members of boards and commissions, department heads, people in the emergency services community, to make sure we really understand all the needs for services in the town so that can be contemplated during the development of the strategic plan. With that, I'll go to my last page, and are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. Questions from board members on this item? Go ahead, Mr. DeWitt.
Yeah, I'll start. Thank you for the briefing. On your slide 4 about your charge, I don't see anything about goals or your charter, what the committee expects to end up with at the end of its process. So what makes this committee a success? What is the charter?
Well, the charge is something that was developed by the Board of Selectmen and basically given to us. If you would like to have identified what we want to accomplish through the strategic plan, the RFP that we prepared pretty much will lay out what that is. But it would be a strategic plan that looks at not shorter-term operational types of adjustments that might be needed here in town, but a little longer time horizon of how we need to think about to adapt our community to address what would make us successful in the future. And it uses a standard strategic planning format that would look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, identify what types of needs and interests that the community has, develop strategic options that would then need to be evaluated, develop an implementation plan to go about implementing it. So,
Okay. Yeah, I would like to see the RFP.
Sure.
Frankly,
Okay.
because I think that's what's telling these companies obviously what to produce. But I have to tell you, reading this whole thing, it seems like you could summarize it in just like 2 steps. Let's ask the taxpayers for some inputs. Let's hire a consultant. I can't believe, after all these years of me personally asking for this, that we can't put together a strategic plan with people in this town. I don't understand why we're hiring contractors. I honest to God don't. They're going to do a SWOT analysis. They're going to make recommendations. You're already looking at other communities, which I'd kind of like to know what communities you're looking at.
okay, I can provide that list. There's 13 to 15 communities where we've seen a strategic plan. All of the plans we have are available on our website. In response to your question as to why we're hiring a consultant, that was part of the charge.
I guess it's more like what. So the charge to me is just a bunch of actions, right? Go out and get a consultant, develop a process, and update us. Okay. It should be a charter, right? Here's what we want to do in the long term, and here's our goals. Charges are actions, right? I don't think you should have been actioned, frankly. I think the board or the committee should have come up with their own charge. But I cannot, how much are we paying for these contractors? What's the going rate?
Define rate. I mean, the range.
How much are they going to charge us?
We saw a range of costs in the marketplace between $50,000 and $75,000 or $100,000 for a consultant to take you through the planning process.
To do a SWOT analysis with recommendations?
Well, there's a little bit more detailed work, and I'm happy to share with you the proposals we received back, many of which have multiple techniques for gathering public input. They hold meetings, they conduct interviews, they do a SWOT analysis, but they help you come up with strategic options, ideas that have worked in other communities.
Wow. I can just speak for myself. I never thought that after all these years of recommending we have a strategic plan, that we needed to go hire someone for 52.
Town asked for help, I signed up. I didn't make up the rules of the game before that.
This is not a criticism of you, for sure. So the other thing that I think is so you think this is going to take a year. So it's already started in June, so we're going to go through 2018, so 18 months. So what decisions does your committee think we should delay while we're waiting for this? Because we've been waiting for this for a long time. And every time we talk about Smith Richardson Clubhouse and there's going to be an ice rink there, I keep saying, I'm like a broken record, what does the strategic plan say? So does your committee have any recommendations about what we should be delaying until we see the strategic plan?
I don't know the full range of things that we're contemplating, so I really couldn't answer that question, in all honesty.
Maybe the RFP will help me understand this. I'm just, maybe it's just me. I just really don't understand the process, and it seems like a lot of money for something that I think we could get 5 or 6 individuals in our town on a committee that could do this without any external help.
There actually were some examples of strategic plans that have been developed by people in the community, and there was a roadmap to help the strategic planning committee get up and running and give it some guidance on steps that would ensure that the plan was comprehensive and well thought out. And all of that's available on our website as well. So
I'll have
you-
to
you're
look.
right.
I did not have yeah, I saw your website on here, so you provided all the information, and again, I appreciate that. And don't take this as a direct criticism.
So I've looked at, as I mentioned, up to 15 different communities. A fair number in Connecticut, several going across the entire country. Some communities do exactly as you described. Some close-by communities did exactly as you described. I believe Wilton was one of them, or Weston, I forget off the top of my head. But they had a number of members. They were going to hire a consultant. They decided to do it themselves. And that was relatively recent. Other communities have hired a consultant and gotten great results. Some communities have hired a consultant and said, they gave us a lot of great ideas, and we did the first one or two, but we never followed through on enough of the other ones because we lost our momentum. So there's a
Right.
lot of different results, a lot of different approaches people have used. And if you have people with the right kind of background in the community, and they had been asked to step up and do it, and some, I believe, did, and they put information in the four corners of a page that laid that out.
Yeah. I hearken back to a conversation we had just tonight, a little while ago, that we did a fairly substantial Board of Ed analysis, right? And we paid, I forget how much we paid for that. It was.
I don't remember.
On the town side, too.
And we did it on the town side, too, that's right. And I don't know that we received the benefits for paying for that, so. Are you authorized to spend this 52, what, I'm sorry, what was the number, 50 to $100,000 range?
There's $100,000 authorized.
There's $100,000 allocated.
We did that several years ago, and it's been carried forward.
Yeah, I seem to remember that. All right, thank you.
We're going to go to Mr. Brown.
I understand. Well, first, thanks for volunteering.
My pleasure,
And your
so
whole
far.
committee. Yeah. I understand what Mr. DeWitt is saying. However, I'm of the feeling that we need a facilitator. So these firms, I think in the end, as long as they do their job, will be worth the cost. Because I don't think a bunch of I don't think you can get the quality of work from volunteers as you can from someone that you're paying, right? So hopefully, we pick the right group, and they do a good job, and we get a better presentation than we got last time we did this. But I'm sure we've learned from last time.
I agree, but just having people from the community do it, you sometimes risk one constituency battling another.
No, what I'm saying
Here,
is
when
I
you use an
agree.
outside consultant,
Yeah.
you have a level of objectivity
Right.
that it helps the process, uses structured techniques to make sure you don't lean too far in one direction versus another direction. So it's beneficial to have that outside influence.
I agree. Maybe I wasn't clear. What I'm saying is I agree with that. So with the firms, have any of these firms worked with the town or municipality in this type of environment or this type of charge before?
I don't believe any of them have worked or been engaged by the town of Fairfield. One or two of them are familiar with Fairfield County. They've worked with MetroCogs. They've been involved in other types of planning activities. I'm not positive. There might be one that had done some work, but I don't think actually engaged by the town.
And I don't mean this town. Have they ever worked with the town for this type of charge previously?
Yes, several of, more than half of them, I would say, half to two-thirds of them.
So
Have
there are-
developed strategic plans for municipalities that range between 10 and 100 or 150,000 residents. So it's a pretty good range of experience the firms have.
Can they give you their end result?
Yes.
Did? Have they done that? or
Several
they
have
can't?
given us sample plans. That's part of the due diligence that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the plans that they submitted and identified for us as part of our review of their capabilities and qualifications.
Okay, good. As far as benchmarking, that's part of the plan? Benchmarking from other municipalities? It's in here, that we're gonna, it's part of the charge, right? Benchmarking?
Right, well, what that meant by benchmarking was to do research and identify communities that had issued RFPs and had developed a strategic plan as part of our developing our RFP. So what we did was make sure that we actually were able to identify the RFP a community used, their completed strategic plan, and we interviewed some people involved in the process in the town on how they got from what they requested to their ultimate strategic plan.
Outside Connecticut as well, or all within Connecticut?
Outside Connecticut as well.
Good. All right, thank you.
Mrs. Marmee?
So, as part of the RFP, are they going to be creating a vision for Fairfield for, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years from now? Is that part of the charge?
That is an aspect of the charge, yes.
Okay.
What we are going to be asking them to do is to help craft where we want to try and take the town as we look into the future.
And how far into the future are we looking at? What's your time? Are we saying in 20 years we want, or is it?
To a galaxy far, far away.
Right. But no, I'm just trying to give us a sense, like, it's a blueprint, right? Basically, for how we get to achieve our vision for where we want to be in. And that's just what I'm wondering, is it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? It's hard to go too far out because of...
The further out you go in a planning horizon, the less precise your
Sure.
results would be.
Sure.
So I would say that the sweet spot would probably be looking out 3 to 4 years, out to probably 10 to 12 years. I don't want to limit what we would ask the consultant to do, but I think in today's economic environment in this state and in aspects of the region and the country, looking out past that horizon, there's a lot of things that can change. I mean, even looking out 5 to 7 years, just look at
Tough,
the business
right.
disruption that's happened with certain businesses. Look at what might happen with education. Is the manner in which we deliver education to our children going to change in 10 to 15 years? It certainly did with the internet. So I would imagine that that would happen as well, and I think we need to be thinking about that. The same thing where the town needs to be and wants to be. Do we want to be a long-term residential community? Do we want to change some dynamics in the town so that we have more of an industrial base? Or do we want to have more of a, not so much commercial, but more of a commercial base rather than an industrial base? Do we want to adapt the manner of our residential community? So that would be something we would need to think about.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Becker?
But just on that timeline, those are even 25-year or longer things that you layer in 5 to 7 years and you maybe can adapt from. But it creates a vision that is much more long-term. I mean, if you wanted to adjust residential and industrial, within the town, even to set the foundation to start to do that could take 5 years once you determine that that's the direction that you want to go, right? So aren't we talking much longer term? We're talking big strategic vision, and then layering sections in, and then from that plan adapting over time.
We haven't even engaged the consultant yet, and different of the consultants will have different time horizons. They will advise you how to go about doing it. I think it would be premature for me to say, I want a plan that's going to be for 2025 or 2030 or something like that. I think during the course of the consultant engaging town officials in interview and hearing from residents, I think that would help devise what that time frame would be. I know there is a community in Connecticut that in 2008 or so developed their 2020 plan. So that was kind of an idea to kind of work with. So.
Okay,
Yes, Mrs. Esmond.
Mr. Nguyen, thank you so much for volunteering to do this. So full disclosure, I've not looked at your website yet, but that's my homework, clearly. But can you give me a sense of what the community engagement entails? The various ways in which you will be engaging the community.
Different of the consultants have different techniques. Pretty much all of them would involve a web survey of some form, community meetings, larger scale community meetings held in an auditorium. There might be focus groups that would be utilized. There might be a questionnaire that would be circulated. There might be an ability to get input from a collection of people. As an example, a senior center, you might hold an event. So there's a wide variety of techniques that the consultant would help us figure out what's going to be the most effective, the highest impact, least expensive to conduct, so we get good, robust input from something more than a handful of people. Because we have seen plans where they've gotten input in a community of 10 or 12,000 from 200 residents, and I don't think that would be representative. So we would want to have multiple approaches to ensure we get a large enough quantity of feedback and input. Right now, if people from the community have an interest in inputting, we have on our website the ability to provide community input. So they can click on something, a web form will come up, it'll be compiled into a database, and we'll continue to use that or other technology enablers that the consultant would help us work with.
Right, and so, clearly in our case, we're a pretty large town, so your comparisons would be firms that have conducted, have done this for towns of roughly our size, because that's a much larger population than anybody around us that
Yes.
that you've looked at. Thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Mrs. Leclerc.
Just, I haven't looked at your website or really followed what the committee's been doing. But my recommendation is to really look pretty far out and try to figure out what our town's needs will be 20, 50 years from now, and then come up with short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals to reach those needs. And to me, that's what a strategic plan should entail. So I just thought, if you're looking for some guidance, that's really how I would look at it.
That's great input. The longer out you go, the less precise you get, the greater difficulty, effort, cost, and time to do that kind of planning. So there are balances and trade-offs on all this.
Anything else? First of all, I want to say that I'm thrilled that we're embarking on this. And as others have said, thank you, and please extend our thank yous to your fellow colleagues on the board. My own personal standpoint is I'd like to make sure that as your committee and as your consultants go about your work, there's no sacred cows. I think everything should be on the table for evaluation and discussion. I encourage you to think broadly and aggressively as to what this town might look like, what the 21st century town might be, related to services provided, opportunities that we have. I think we should know what our options are to take advantage and maximize some of the town assets. That doesn't mean that we do all of them. There might be very good reasons why we decide not to do certain things, whether it be with the beachfront, whether it be with, some of the open space or what have you. But I think it should be a dialogue, and there should be conscious decisions made as to why we do certain things and why we don't. And it would be a real shame if the plan that is developed is not actionable, right? We all, through our professional careers, have seen plans that were great, were well-intentioned, and then sat on the shelf and no one ever was able to put them into implementation. So I hope that it's a plan that comes back that has some concrete recommendations and action steps. And Mr. Tetra, I hope the administration receives that plan, presents that plan, and moves forward in unison with the other town bodies to act upon the elements of the plan that we can, so that we can move the town forward. I think it's a very critical midterm, let's say, tool for management of the town, particularly with what our discussions are as what's going on at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we had more of such planning, maybe at that level, we wouldn't be in such desperate straits as we are as a state right now.
Mm-hmm.
So what the work you all are doing is very important, And we thank you again, and please continue to update us, both when invited as well as when you feel you have something you want to share.
Okay, can I make a request?
You absolutely can.
You all have given some great ideas and suggestions in talking about it, and I'll take that back to the committee, and I'll take it to work with the consultant that we actually engaged to help do this.
Yep.
I'd like to figure out a mechanism to allow better input from you all, and having input from everybody in a meeting like this might be good, but if there's a smaller collection of 2 or 3 members of your committee that would like to interface with the planning consultant on a more regular basis or be interviewed by them, I'd love to, take that.
Happy to. Let's get you and let's speak about it, and I'll
Okay.
bring it back to our group, and we'll put something together.
Okay, great.
And including, by the way, small group settings like you recommended in interviews, as well as, I think I can speak for this board, where we could easily make all of us available.
And you all
this
can
type
provide
setting.
input through our website, through the community feedback link. It'll bring up a form, fill it out, and we'll take that information from there as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. DeWitt?
I must have missed it before. So you have a consultant that's helping the committee, and then you're going to hire a consulting firm.
No, the consulting firm is the consultant.
It's a consultant, okay.
Yeah. It's
So
just
we
the-
can't talk to this consultant now because you haven't picked
We
the
haven't
firm yet.
engaged them yet.
Right, okay.
We
I
need to.
thought you just said we could talk to the consultant right now, which I...
When we
guess-
have the consultant
When we
on
have him in
board.
place. Got it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Nguyen. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The next item is to hear a cost update report on the pile cleanup. We've been following this eagerly through the press. Mr. Michelangelo is here. We did get a presentation on this a few months back, and now we've got additional information. Sorry for the lateness of the hour, and please, why don't you give us your update?
No problem. Joe Michelangelo, Director of Public Works. The remediation project at the town yard began approximately June 10th, I believe. So one of the major components, the bidder on it was Connecticut Tank Removal, a local firm, expertise in the area. Logical Environmental was the licensed environmental professional, so they both oversaw the action, oversaw the work, in addition to Brian Carey of our conservation office. So they oversaw the work, and they would collect the samples on site. And the third part of it is Phoenix Lab, who is the testing lab. So the methodology that we went through is the most expensive part of the whole procedure is actually shipping, trucking, hauling the material to a disposal site in Pennsylvania. So one of the methodologies was, even though we had an idea where the contaminants were as far as a width, a depth, a prism, so to speak, one of the things you don't want to do is over-excavate to get into the good soil. So the methodology was take a big bite out of the pile, do some test samples, get back, and if they do not come back positive, you excavate again. Once again, another little bite of the pile in iteration. So there was probably around 4 or 5 of those iterations, and every bite we took out, we had less and less hits until you get down to the bottom, to the ultimately clean soil. So that happened, I believe, on October 11th was the last, soil was hauled away. All the test results came back positive. So the only thing to do after that is to write your closure report, the formal report to DEP that the area has been remediated. So that has been done. I think the final report is supposed to be submitted this week. So the cost breakdown, and they're on the sheet there. The total that was allocated was $289,000, and in total we're just about expended all that funding with the exception of $3,212. So it came in right at the number, and we're done with that part of the remediation.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Michelangelo on the pile? Mr. DeWitt?
So we're done with remediation, that's great. So do we have a plan, which is, I guess, what we are initially trying to do to make the pile less of a pile? Including making it into a berm, I guess, or?
Correct. So that's one of the things we've been working with the neighbors on is a design of a landscape berm to shield the public works operations from our neighbors to the south, which will use up quite a bit of money. We'll use up quite a bit of material.
Freudian slip.
Yep. And also, as you know, we have a action against the vendor that hopefully will allow some of the material to be moved from that also.
So I was looking through your presentation. I'm curious, after you make the berm that's proposed, how big is the pile? I mean, there's always going to be a pile, right? Is that not correct?
Well, we hope to reduce it, but the berm will only use up probably less than 50% of the material that's on site.
What's the goal of the pile? Is there a height, width?
Well,
the
first goal is to make it so that the residents can't see our operations there. So if you're on Fairfield Beach Road looking, you'll see a green hillside with trees, and whatever material or trucks or construction equipment there will be
Obscured by
invisible to the neighbors to the south.
So there's no, so I get it, and I mean, that makes sense, right? You don't want the neighbors to see the pile or the operations. But after we've gone through this whole thing, don't we want to have some kind of restriction, if for nothing else internal, to say, hey, when the pile gets to be X, it's time to move out material? Or?
Correct, and that's one thing we've also been, working with the neighbors on is a 5-year plan, how we're going to proceed. And if you saw the PowerPoint at our last meeting, the 10th, so
that was the one you provided in the backup, right?
Correct. So no material has gone in there since December 13th. So since that time, in some of the pictures, we're trying to illustrate, how we've been doing it for the last 10 months. So the last 10 months, we've been managing the spoils that we generate in another area of the public works yard, putting in bins, crushing it, filtering it out, jockeying it along those construction bins there. So that's not the most efficient, that's not the long-term way we want to do stuff. But as far as a general methodology, that's how we have to handle our spoils. And, so generate them, crush them, reuse them, do not let them build up. So that's the methodology going forward that we have to stick to and not let it grow and grow.
So I don't want to go through the whole sordid story here, but I want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. So the original goal of the original contract was to get rid of the pile, right?
Correct.
That didn't happen. In fact, reason to believe the pile grew during that period of time. Fine.
Yes.
Environmental cleanup cost $285,000, correct? The cost, right, and I'm going to put that in parentheses, of creating this berm is $60,000, right?
Out of pocket, correct.
Out of pocket. Good term, all right. Now, there's actually an incremental cost that's not captured here with that $60,000, which is the cost of our internal labor that'll be redirected from other projects to this project.
Correct.
Right, so we're incurring cost related to this project not captured on this sheet. That's really the opportunity cost of using resources in a way that we didn't intend to use the resources.
Correct, both the labor and the construction equipment.
Right, the equipment and the labor, right. So that's not factored in here. The other thing that I don't see here is, and you mentioned it to yourself, which was thank you for the information, the creation of the berm's only going to be using 50% of what's there, right?
Correct.
Maybe under 50% of what's there. How do we get rid of the rest of the 50%, which was part of the original goal anyway, and how much is that going to cost?
And once again, the current lawsuit is one avenue, but I've always said that the material as a raw material, it does have some value, and I'll compare it to digging out of a a quarry or a, bank run somewhere in a different part of the state. So you need a source for these things. So whether you get it on, if you drive up Route 8 between exits 21 and 22 and you look to the left, you see, a hillside that's been,
Dug out.
Yeah, dug out. So once again, so this would displace material that's from there. So the material does have some, some use as a raw material, using those screeners and sorters. And once again,
Okay, so we tried that, though, right? I mean, that was the original contract that,
correct, and it won't be done on that scale.
he who shall not be named, right. So what's the plan with the extra 50% that's not, are we going to try that again? What are we doing with the extra 50% of the material?
Okay, and once again, not at that scale at all. But one of the things that we were doing when we went through the cost estimating of what it would take to get rid of all that material through about a dozen different contractors, there's some, I'd say there's some interest in potentially getting rid of it through shipping it out and using it in construction projects in other locations.
Okay, so where are we in that process? Is this going to cost us anything to get rid of this extra 50%?
Well, and once again, where are we in the process? The first step was getting rid of remediation. The next step
Great.
is doing the berm. And then as part of our plan going forward, not just what to do with the 50%, but how do we manage the stuff that we generate on a daily basis?
Understand that.
Is going forward. That's what we have to answer, and we're not ready for that yet. But once again, in talking to 10 or 12 vendors, there's possibilities for getting rid of the material.
So
and,
when
and we went
w-
as far as people telling us sites where they would bring
Yeah, I get it.
projects.
So when will we have an answer?
And I'd say we're several months away from that. Once again,
Is several months, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year?
well, and once again, I'd say probably in the 3-month range.
3 month range? Okay,
Right.
so at
And
our
that-
next
that's
quarter-
part of the 5-year plan that we're.
I understand. At the next, at our next quarterly, then, can we get a review of this? So that should be, 3 months or so. Can we put this back on and see where we are with the plan? I'm going to call it day 2, right? We're in day 1 right now, which is cleaning up. Day 2 is, what do we do with the extra 50% of the stuff, and how much is it going to cost, if anything?
Yep, by all means.
All right, and Mr. Lesser, I see you're here. Thank you for being here. I know it's a late night. We would also, and we can't do it now, but in executive session, maybe next time, maybe next quarter, we would love to get an update on where we're going with this lawsuit and how that's coming forward, particularly as we prepare for the budget season. Would that be okay? So if we could plan for that as well. Yeah.
Perhaps the answer on that?
Next quarterly is only 2 months away,
Okay.
so you want
Well,
to do it
we'll
in 2
see.
months or 5 months?
Let's see where we are and let's see where we are in February. Let's see if Mr. Michelangelo has any additional information or certainty. And thank you for that. And if he doesn't, we'll do it perhaps during the budget process, just to make sure we know where we stand. And we would love to get an update on the lawsuit. I assume I took your shake of the head as an affirmative that we can do that. What's perhaps mean?
Why don't you have them come up? Why don't you have them come up?
Well, yeah, come on up for a second, because let's get that on the record. Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you.
So what was that you said?
We'll see where we are at that stage. I mean, there's certain things we can talk about. I don't know. I'm actually not handling the lawsuit in that case, so I'll have to speak to the lawyers who are and see what they want to discuss.
Are you managing when something like that happens?
I know what's going on.
Okay, so you're kind of managing the lawyers that are actually managing the case?
Yes.
Okay. It'd be great to know, even if we don't have a ton of
And I
information.
can tell you very briefly what stage it's at. It's public information.
Perfect.
Sure. So an application for a prejudgment remedy was filed, and there was a hearing that was held on it, and we're waiting for a decision from the judge on the.
Do you have any sense of the time frame of that?
No.
How long ago was the public hearing on that?
It's been a while.
It's been more than 120 days?
No.
No.
What's
It's Judge Rush.
Well, they're supposed to make a decision within 100, the judges are supposed to on those, well, they have to, but then they go past it. So they're supposed to,
Then they ask
under
you for
the
an
rules,
extension,
make
and
one.
no one ever doesn't give them an extension, so.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
I would assume it's,
Most of the time
should
it
be
comes down.
fairly imminent. He's had it for a bit.
Okay.
And then we'll see where we're going from there.
Great. We want to stay on top of this, both on what it's going to cost us in terms of to get where we thought we wanted to be before this, and then we'd love to know the progression of the lawsuit.
No problem.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Mr. Michelangelo? Go to Mr. Mottola and
Mr. Michelangelo. So what you just said, if I'm understanding you, you kind of said several things. But what you're saying is there's a possibility that with the remaining 50% of this pile, that's something that outside contractors may want to purchase from us to use somewhere else for fill. Is that what you were saying?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. Thanks.
Mr. Walsh.
If they do that, and our testing misses some PCBs in that are eventually found, we're still responsible for that, correct?
We would test this, so whatever's determination and,
But we only take samples, correct? So if we miss the sample that has some and it's later determined that there is some, we are still legally on the hook as part of the chain of that. PCBs.
Okay. Well, and the testing of the material going out will be overseen by a LEP and will be done by protocol. So, so it'll be done to a professional standard. So we won't miss it. It would be known or before it leaves the site.
Okay, and how do they do that? They take random samples, correct?
Correct. Obviously you don't take every single grain, but there's protocols that you follow on any testing site, even when you get it from a O&G and Tilcon.
Okay. Well, I would hope that we at least look into whoever takes it, get an indemnification agreement that they're not going to come back after us, because it just scares me that we're taking something where we only have samples and potentially selling it down the way. And potentially still staying, even though I understand what you're saying is that you're taking samples, that we have what was a contaminated site. We're hoping that it's completely cleaned up, and we may to the DEP standard, but it's just, I've seen clients held liable down the line of mine for transferring contaminated material.
Yeah. And I, I want to just, when we say sell it, and once again, that's yet to be determined whether someone will,
understand
whether
that
we
too.
pay them or they pay us for it.
Yep.
Are the attorneys in the room done? No. Gonna miss this.
Well, further to Mr. Walsh's point, so when you sell this material, would the purchaser want to buy it with a contingency that they do their own testing, or?
Yeah, so the testing protocol will be established, so
Yeah.
so they'll know what they're getting. So, and when I say know what they're getting, there are what they call PAHs in it, which is the nature of the asphalt there. So there are PAHs in my driveway and our streets.
Mhm.
So that's the type of stuff that's there. So you could characterize this material has X, Y, and Z. This is what you're getting, and for some reason down the line, if they say there was something else in it, well, that's not what this report says. So,
And some of it that we may be able to repurpose for our own needs.
correct.
And I just want to thank the town for coming in under budget and for your, hard work and oversight on this.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, Mr. Michelangelo, thank you very much, and we look forward to future updates on this.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Last item, to review legal bills relating to the 2017 special election. This is a recurring item from a past meeting, where we had some questions regarding the legal fees associated with this, the status of attorneys getting paid, and any ongoing work. So Mr. Lesser's here, Mr. Tetro's in the audience, so I'd like to thank Mr. Mayor for putting together the analysis. Why don't we start this off before going to Mr. Lesser by going to Mr. Mayor and just tell us what you put together for us and how you came about it, sir.
On?
I believe
I'm
you
on.
are.
I'm on. Basically, we made inquiry of Attorney Lesser to see who's all the various people who are working on the case, and also went through our billing records to confirm that. And then we went through the billing records and pulled out all the billing amounts that had been received. You can see from the sheet that was handed out, there's Mr. Lesser's firm, there's Robert Morin's firm, who was the attorney for the town. Well, I'm not going to go into that. That's legal. Who's attorney for who was kind of confusing in this case. And then we have Coates Baldwin, attorney for the town. Update on the schedule there. We have received, as of after the schedule was produced, a further billing from Coles, Baldwin, and Kaiser for another approximately $15,000. And Mr. Baldwin's office was delivered a check today for the total of the $70,000 that's been billed.
He's been given a check for a total of how much?
I had it delivered today, $70,000.
So this invoice plus...
Plus is...
Plus the invoice that's not represented here.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I might be wrong on $1,000.
It was about 13,000.
It's about
Okay.
70 in total. And Carmody Torrance was the firm that was engaged. That is the final billing. They have not billed us, but they have confirmed that is the balance due.
For what- and what
Actually,
did-
they have billed us, and that is the balance due.
What is that?
That
What-
was the firm that did the audit of the Coles, Baldwin, and Kaiser bill. And so you get down to the bottom, the grand total. Billed amounts would be increased by 13 to 14,000. Paid amount would be increased by 70,000. And balance due is, I guess, $3,570.
About 6,500.
So, just to follow up, the last law firm,
Excuse me, plus more, and I thought we'd paid more, but I guess we haven't.
the Carmody, thank you. That law firm was engaged to audit the billings of the Coles law firm.
Correct, and that would be something you'd have to speak to Attorney Lesser about. That was not a financial audit, that was a legal audit.
Legal audit meaning...
It's a review. He reviewed the bill.
Okay, so we paid $3,500, $3,600 for them to review the Coles Baldwin bill, and since the Coles Baldwin bill was paid in full, there were no issues with that bill found as a result of the review.
Based on the review, it was decided to pay the entire bill.
Okay. So what did his review consist of for $3,600?
He looked at the bill, he looked at the issues, and that's really all I want to say about it at this point. But I will say that based on his review, it was determined to pay the entire bill.
Okay, so it wasn't, it was actually a document review then?
It was a document and issues review. He looked at the whole spectrum of the bill and the circumstances.
Okay. I'll turn it over. I just wanted to make sure we had all the information. Mr. Mayor, thank you for providing that as well as the update. That's new information. Questions from others on these bills? We'll go to Mr. Walsh.
When did we get the subsequent invoice from Coles, Baldwin, and Kaiser? What's that dated?
This is a couple days ago, I think.
Yeah, this week.
Maybe last week.
Last week.
Any reason we didn't get that delivered here?
Pardon?
Any reason we don't have that here today, like before?
I guess I could have bought it, but but I didn't have it when we put the package together.
All right. Would we be able to get that,
Sure.
since we're looking at the whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Was, as part of that invoice, were we charged any interest by the Coles, Baldwin, and Kaiser firm for paying their bill late?
$569.
$569.
So is that included in the 55,840, or is the 55,840?
It was included in the second bill.
Okay, so part of the 13 to 15 included
Right.
interest.
Correct.
Late fee. I think
Yeah.
it's deemed a late fee.
Okay. All right.
So basically, this delay in paying them and review process cost the town $4,000 plus. cost the town an extra 4,000 plus, correct?
Correct.
And none of the other bills were reviewed, correct?
Correct. Well,
It's correct.
Correct. Okay, and
They weren't reviewed by outside counsel.
they weren't reviewed by outside counsel? Okay. And I saw one of the charges on the Carmody bill, and it actually went through, and the attorney went through to review it, Coles, Baldwin, and Kaiser's bill against the appellate record to make sure that those charges seem to be appropriate. I can read this, I can read it, but I think you know what I'm talking about, correct? But he did not do that for any of the other bills since they weren't reviewed. And I went through it, as I told you the last time, and went through the record to see what was kind of outrageous, to see the same thing, to see if there was anything glaring popping up to me. I will tell you, there's one bill that shows up on Mr. Moran's bill, which you supplied and is here today, for it was a 9, it was billed on, I believe, hold on one second, September 21st, for him to do a reply to the appellate court, his brief. And the odd thing about that is that that brief was rejected by the appellate court because it was untimely. He was supposed to have submitted it on September 5th, and when I went through it, there's a form that you get from the appellate court when they take your brief, any of the briefs, to make sure it's in compliance. And I think there was 4 or 5 boxes checked off, not submitting electronically, not submitting it timely, and they rejected the brief. So I don't know why we're paying for that charge for 1.7 hours for that response. But, you know, I guess Carmody and Torrance would have picked up on that if they had reviewed that bill. Mr. Lesser, I took a look at your bills, and the only thing I really have to say is that you don't seem to bill for all your time, right? The town? There seems to be significant amounts of time, January, February, you weren't billing for. There seems to be none of the charges that the gentleman from Carmody and Torrance, the attorney there, when his bill, he goes into many entries in here, talking about conversations you had, emails you had back and forth. You know, I highlighted them. They total up about 5.4 hours that you didn't bill for at all. I mean, and these are all stuff, I mean, unless, I mean, this guy seems to be an ethics guy, and you know, that's what I think you brought him in for. He normally charges $500 an hour. I guess he did it for the town for $300 an hour. And, you know, you don't bill for any of those charges.
I
Correct?
don't know whether I did or I didn't. I have a bill
Yeah, I know.
pending that hasn't been submitted yet. I don't know what's on it.
All right, because there doesn't seem to be one charge for here. So, and then there seems to be stuff that was going on way back when. So, you know, thank you, number one, for not billing for us. But I think your bill, if you'd really billed your true time, would have been a lot more. And I'm sure that happens in other places
Yeah, I don't
as
think,
well.
I don't think it would have been hugely higher. Do I bill for every little phone call? Probably not.
Yeah, but I mean, just on
Every
this
email.
bill alone.
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but
Just, you know,
It would be
just-
higher, but-
Just this bill alone, if you just compared it, and it'd be over $1,000.
as we both know, Mr. Walsh, I only have to answer to myself. I don't have partners to answer to, so.
No, I know. So you do work sometimes for the town, and you just don't charge for it.
Sometimes.
Yeah, okay. There seems to be, and, it's kind of interesting, because I just saw that the matter was just certified up to the Supreme Court.
No, that's not correct. It
What is
wasn't
it?
certified.
What was it?
They took it.
They took it. So they wanted to hear it, correct? They didn't want the appellate court to hear it?
That's the way it looks.
Exactly, right? And when I went through Mr. Baldwin's bill at Coles, Baldwin, and Kaiser, there was a lot of fighting going on about him wanting it to go up to the Supreme Court. And fighting back and forth and objections. Mr. Moran bills for them. And I just find it kind of ironic because despite all of that, and
I'm not sure that that's what you're referring to, and without looking at the bill, I don't really want to speculate, but don't forget, there was a petition for certification to the Supreme Court filed by Attorney Baldwin, which was recently dismissed. So that's what that may refer to. I don't know whether it does or not. Again, you know, Mr. Baldwin was fighting with Attorney Green and Attorney Burke, so.
on that issue,
Yeah,
correct?
well, whatever.
About whether it
was.
should go up to the Supreme Court or not.
Yeah, I don't know whether they wanted this particular case. I think it would have been premature to ask for this case to go to the Supreme Court. You would have to wait till the appellate court made its decision. I do know that they filed a petition for cert on another issue.
Another issue, yeah.
That was denied.
But now they've taken it. So it is going
Took
to be.
this case. They
yeah.
took the case that he filed in the appellate court, yes.
All right. I guess that's all I have for now. I think my comment is that I just think we've spent a lot of money. I mean, and it doesn't appear that Carmody and Torrance, at least right now, since they're accepting this bill and being willing to be paid, looked at the last bill. At least it's not on here up until the date that you tell me that the billing is
Probably did.
finalized.
I doubt that they did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just seems like a lot of money, $4,000 on what was a 50-some-odd thousand dollar bill.
56,000,
Spend
50.
$4,000 not to pay. And I would also say that I think there's other attorneys in this area who could have handled this, not politically connected, maybe even out of town, but not have to pay $300 an hour, who would have taken this. I mean, I could think of like Alex Sternbecki or somebody like that who would have taken this to review, and we could have got it done for less amount of money.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sure, Mr. Mottola.
So, I mean, the way I look at this is a couple of things. First of all, you couldn't review the bill because you were involved with the case. Is that a fair statement?
I just felt it would be better for somebody independent to review.
Okay. And I mean, the way I see it is that we have two legal bills from two firms or solo practitioners who were working on the same case, same issues, and Attorney Baldwin's bill working on the same case, mostly the same issues involved, and his bill is about 10 times higher than the other bills. And so I'm glad you took the time and spent $3,000 to review. Those $4,000 to review that. And it's going to be paid, that's fine. We had an outside
Was
lawyer look
paid.
at it. But I think it would almost have been negligent if we didn't do that.
Mr. Mottola, I'm not an attorney, so I get it, and there's no motivation behind this. I just want to ask a question. There wasn't just these attorneys involved in this case, though, right?
Looking at the bills right here.
No, these are the ones that the town paid for, though. There was also other plaintiffs that had other attorneys, right?
Okay, the town bills. Still working on the same
I
issues.
think he's talking about Attorney Green and Attorney Burke.
I'm talking about what we have in front of us right here.
Yeah, no. What I'm saying is,
And Robert Moran.
no, what I'm saying is, you made a very valid point. I just don't know whether it's a complete point.
Gotcha, you're right. There's other lawyers working on it. I don't know what their
Right,
bills
so
were.
you had, and I'm just saying this because I had the same concern. I bring it up because I had the same concern. It was pointed out to me that it's like, hey, you had Attorney Lesser, you had Attorney Moran, you had Attorney Green, and you had I think you had a fourth attorney, right? So because I had the same concern, because when you look at the numbers, you sit there and go, holy crow, right? What's this compared to the other one? Then you sit there and say, well, you're dealing with one law firm versus 3 to 4 law firms, so it's not quite as black and white as the numbers here make
And,
it.
and that's a fair statement. I'm just looking at what do we have in front of us right here,
Yeah.
so.
No, I get it. I get it.
And you know what? It's being paid, and that's good, and I'm glad it was reviewed, and I know it cost the town some money to do it, but, and let's not sugarcoat this. We know there's a, I think it was important to send it out to somebody else to look at, that's all. So I don't want to belabor this.
I would, to be honest, the only thing I would have said, I would have sent them all out. I would have sent them all out. If you're going to do one, I think, to look fair, you look at them all.
I just think the reason, without speaking for anybody, why the others ones were sent out, they're just on their face are reasonable.
Yeah, except when the guy didn't hit the deadline, didn't file electronically, didn't do his
But
thing,
that's,
and we're
that's,
paying. I'm just saying, I just bring that
I'm
up.
not sure that that brief wasn't ultimately filed in any
It's
event,
accepted.
and I
It
haven't
happens
looked at it,
sometimes
so
up there.
I can't.
Yeah, I don't know, I just look
Might
at
have
what
been
the.
filed late, but there's people that have filed late things
Yeah.
also that ultimately get.
No,
didn't
I'm
look to
looking
see
at
whether it
what
was
lessons are learned here, and I think lessons learned when we put something out, if we have a matter where we're looking at all of them, or one of them, we should look at all of them.
And I think Mr. Flynn makes a good point, because, you know, I'm just interested in the law part of it, so I read some of these briefs, and I think Mr. Green did a good brief, but it was a lot more thorough brief than Mr. Moran did. Mr. Moran's briefs were a Me Too brief, is what we call them, which was, I agree with basically Mr. Green's brief. Didn't have case law stated in them, whatever. So there was a lot more work, I think, done by Mr. Green and Mr. Burke that I think you could see in the billing, I think, when you read them both. But I think that if you know, and those are private billings, so we can't see them.
Yeah.
They're paid by private clients. But I think to avoid, in the future, something like this, to avoid it looking political, you got to send all of them out. You got to send all the bills out on the whole thing. The town's going to be paying them. Either do you one or you do none. And then, how often, Mr. Lesser, have bills been sent out for review? Because I can't remember it
Sorry,
being
I
done.
didn't hear the question.
How often are bills sent out for review? How often, since you've been town attorney, have you ever sent?
This is the first time.
First time?
Yeah.
Okay. It just looks odd. And I remember that bills way back, you know, when I was on the RTM, and that we had paid on the Metro Center astronomical invoices. I mean, seriously, astronomical. Some of them came up when Mike and I were on the Board of Selectmen together. Not one of them was ever sent out for review. Bills were just paid. And I just find it gives the appearance of politics, and I'll just leave it there.
Thank you.
Mr. Becker?
Yeah, so I look at the amounts here with the different attorneys, and one of the questions that I have, to some extent, I understand that they're going to be obligated to do some filings, but you have a defendant agreeing with the plaintiff, and it split in here is one and partial on the billing on the other attorney, probably amounting to almost $10,000 to simply agree with the plaintiffs. I mean, I don't like the fact that, you know, the Baldwin bill was so big, and I'll bet you that the plaintiffs didn't like that their bills were probably very big, but those attorneys were working their tails off for their cause. On the other side, you've got, again, almost, you know, probably almost $10,000 total split against, as Mr. Walsh mentioned, Me Too briefs and whatever goes associated with that. I mean, it's a huge amount of money to simply agree with the plaintiff. So, you know, that's, I guess, you know, the town attorney feels comfortable with the amounts and all of that, but I mean, that's
I think
just
the
when I
bottom
look
line,
at
Mr.
it,
Becker,
that's
is
what
that
I see.
An attorney has to represent his client. So the attorney represents what his client's position is, and if that's the position, then that's what the attorney does.
Not disagreeing, just when I look at the amounts, you see the Baldwin and it looks so big, but then you look at the other ones and you go, wow, 10 grand was spent on agreeing with the other side. So
It
clearly,
was spent on representing his client, Mr. Becker.
Me too. Okay. Mr. DeWitt?
Just one last question, because it's been so long and I've just forgotten. Who actually made the initial decision that this bill was out of order and needed to be reviewed? I recall Mr. mayor telling us the bill wasn't paid, but I don't remember who told you not to pay the bill.
I honestly don't remember who actually made the decision. It was, yeah, I think it was, I mean,
So the
ultimately,
first
it's-
selectman and the town attorney decided that we would go down a
think it was-
path that would lead us to $4,000 of reviews and
Yes,
additional fees.
I'd say.
Okay.
Okay, so at any point, did the first selectman, were there any motions to remove himself from this case since he agreed with the plaintiffs? I mean, he was named initially, so I get it. You have to hire an attorney, you have to go through all this. But at any point, were there motions to say, by the way, I agree with you, if those guys and, the town and everybody wants to be listed, fine, but can you take me off the case?
You know,
Right,
I
like
don't
similar to if it
know,
was
but I don't know
two
that
parties.
he's a defendant in the case. He's a
Right.
defendant, I don't know that he has the right
Yeah.
to
Just-
say that, so.
I'm just looking at, where,
Mr. Becker, if you're talking legal strategy, I'm not sure this is the Board of
Yeah, I
Legal
agree with
Strategy.
that.
I think
I'm
it's the Board
asking
of
if any
Finance.
public documents exist that say, I agree, please take me
You
off.
can look
You-
at the
you-
website.
Mr. Becker, you're talking legal strategy. It just,
Thank you.
Fine.
Okay.
So that's, I'm not going to answer. Okay.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this or any other topic we discussed tonight? Mr. Lesser?
Yes.
Thank you for staying late and being here with us.
No problem.
Mr. Tetra, Mr. Mayor, and everybody, thank you so much.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
happy Thanksgiving all around.
Travel safe. Can I get a motion?
Yes, I move the Giants beat the Redskins.
I will be at that game. Do we have a motion to adjourn,
Had a
Ms.
second?
Marming? A second by Ms. Esme. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Good night, everybody.